Hey guys, tonight we are not venturing into bustling cities or ancient courts, but to the wild, windswept edges of the world, to a place of stark beauty and profound solitude. We're going to explore the lonely vigil and the meticulous daily routines of 19th century lighthouse keepers. Picture yourself perched in a stone tower, the relentless sea your constant companion, the cry of gulls your main conversation. Honestly, with the isolation, the often ferocious weather, the demanding, repetitive tasks, and the sheer crushing weight of responsibility for unseen lives, you probably wouldn't survive a month as a 19th century lighthouse keeper without developing some serious sea shanties or a very strong opinion on different types of fog. But these keepers, they stood their watch, a steadfast beacon against the dark. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps to keep this little beacon of boring history shining. And while you're at it, perhaps type your current location and local time in the comments below. It's always a comfort to know where our global night watch is stationed. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our journey tonight takes us far from the familiar comforts of settled land, out to where the restless ocean gnaws relentlessly at the rugged coastline, or perhaps even further still, to a tiny, wave-battered, isolated islet, miles from any welcoming shore. Here, standing defiant against the elements, is our subject for this sleepy exploration, the 19th century lighthouse. It is a silent, stoic sentinel, usually constructed of massive blocks of stone or, in some daring instances, of revolutionary iron, its singular, all-important eye gazing out with unwavering intensity over the vast, indifferent, and often treacherous expanse of the sea. Imagine, if you will, this imposing structure, painstakingly built to withstand the full, unbridled fury of nature. It might be a tall, elegantly tapered stone tower, its circular form designed for strength, rising with steadfast dignity from a craggy clifftop, its whitewashed walls a stark, lonely contrast against the dark, unforgiving rock and the often turbulent gray skies. Or perhaps it's an audacious feat of Victorian engineering, an intricate iron skeletal tower anchored precariously, almost impossibly, to a submerged, wave-swept reef, the wild waves of the Atlantic or the Pacific crashing ceaselessly, thunderously against its slender legs, sending deep, resonant shudders up through its very core. The 19th century, as you may recall, was a golden age of lighthouse construction and optical innovation. It was a time when global maritime trade and passenger travel were exploding exponentially, and these steadfast beacons, these pillars of light, were the absolutely critical, life-saving pieces of infrastructure that made much of this new global interconnectedness possible and, more importantly, survivable. Your Wi-Fi connection dropping out for an hour back in your comfortable modern home probably feels like a major life crisis, doesn't it? A source of genuine frustration and perhaps even a little panic. Now, try to imagine, just for a moment, your nearest actual human neighbor being a particularly grumpy, territorial seagull with strong opinions about your presence, and your only potential Tinder matches being the distant, fleeting lights of unknown ships just briefly passing in the deep of the night, unaware of your solitary existence beyond your vital beam. That, my friends, was often the baseline reality for a lighthouse keeper. Breathe in the air around you in this imagined tower. It's thick, almost palpable, with the sharp, clean scent of salt spray carried on every gust of wind. There's the smell of damp, ancient stone, the faint, slightly metallic tang of the ironwork, and perhaps, if you're close to the heart of the tower, the faint, oily mineral aroma from the great lamp itself, the very reason for the tower's existence. Now, listen, there's the constant, rhythmic, and deeply resonant roar, or the gentle, sighing whisper of the waves against the shore or the tower's base. A sound that never truly ceases, day or night. There's the mournful, piercing cry of seabirds, gulls, terns, perhaps even the occasional patrolling oyster catcher. And then there's the wind, the relentless, ever-present wind, as it whips and whistles around the exposed stonework, sometimes making the very tower seem to hum, or groan, or even subtly sway like a living thing in the grip of a storm. It's a powerful elemental symphony of solitude, the constant, unavoidable soundtrack to an incredibly isolated human existence. And within this starkly isolated world, within these thick, unyielding, circular walls, lives are protagonist for tonight's tale, The Lighthouse Keeper. In some of the larger, more significant land-based lighthouse establishments, especially those marking major harbors or particularly dangerous stretches of coastline, there might have been a staff of 2 or even 3 keepers. This often consisted of a principal keeper and 1 or 2 assistants, who would share the demanding, round-the-clock duties and carefully scheduled watches. But on many of the smaller, more remote rock lighthouses, or for very long, solitary stretches of an individual watch, the keeper was utterly, profoundly alone, a single, solitary figure entrusted with a task of almost unimaginable importance and unrelenting, constant pressure. His entire world, for weeks or even months at a time, was often confined to the few circular rooms stacked one upon the other within the tower, the narrow, winding stone staircase that connected them, and at the very apex, the all-important, glass-encased lantern room that housed the precious light. And what a monumental responsibility it was that rested upon those solitary shoulders. Upon this one individual, upon their unwavering diligence, their complete sobriety, their absolute reliability, their meticulous attention to every tiny detail of their complex machinery, depended the very lives of countless unseen, unknown mariners out there on the dark and often stormy seas. A flickering, uncertain flame, a poorly trimmed wick producing too much smoke, a lamp mechanism that failed in the teeth of a howling gale, any such seemingly small lapse, any moment of inattention could spell utter disaster. It could mean a proud sailing ship, laden with valuable cargo and crew, or a steamship full of hopeful emigrants, guided by a false hope or, worse, no guiding light at all, crashing with devastating force onto hidden rocks or treacherous submerged shoals. The keeper was the steadfast guardian against the ever-hungry sea, the crucial human element in an intricate system designed to cheat watery death and guide the lost safely to harbor. There was simply no room for error, no allowance for sick days unless a colleague could take over, which was often not possible on remote stations. No possibility of saying, "I just don't feel like lighting the lamp tonight." The light had to burn, and it had to burn bright and true. From the officially mandated moment of sunset to the precise moment of sunrise, every single night of the year, regardless of the ferocity of the weather, regardless of the keeper's own physical health or state of mind. No pressure at all. Right. Just the continued existence and safe passage of every soul on that passing ship full of, say, expensive Chinese tea, important government dispatches, and perhaps a few very, very seasick cats. Depending entirely on you remembering to meticulously trim the lamp's wick at exactly the right intervals and keep the vital oil flowing smoothly to the burner. You can imagine it might make it a little difficult to sleep soundly during your brief off-watch hours. With that thought in your head, it is a mainstream historical fact that lighthouses in the 19th century were absolutely critical, indispensable pieces of maritime infrastructure, vital for ensuring the relative safety of burgeoning global shipping routes that fueled international trade and migration. Lighthouse keepers, who were often appointed after a rigorous selection process that vetted their character, sobriety, and technical aptitude, and who were subject to incredibly detailed operational instructions and regular inspections from governing bodies like the UAPTUS, Lighthouse Board, or Trinity House in the United Kingdom, were solemnly responsible for maintaining the light without fail from sunset to sunrise each and every night. This was a duty that demanded unwavering dedication, constant vigilance, and meticulous, almost obsessive care. This stark, isolated tower was not just a workplace for the keeper. For extended periods, it was also his home, a confined, often Spartan, and incredibly isolated dwelling. The lower rooms within the tower might contain a small, functional living area, a tiny kitchen with a stove for warmth and cooking, and secure storage spaces for the precious lamp oil, spare parts, tools, and provisions that had to last between infrequent supply deliveries. Higher up in the tower, often just below the lantern room itself to allow for quick access, there might be a small, cramped sleeping bunk. Every single inch of space within these circular confines was typically utilitarian, designed primarily for function over comfort, a constant, unavoidable reminder of the singular, overriding, life-saving purpose of the entire structure. For a quirky tidbit about these dedicated individuals, the lighthouse keepers of this era were often affectionately, or perhaps sometimes rather disparagingly, nicknamed Wickies. This moniker, of course, stemmed from their constant, essential, and highly skilled task of meticulously trimming the wicks of the massive oil lamps. This was a crucial duty, as an improperly trimmed wick could lead to a smoky, dim, or even dangerously flickering flame, thereby reducing the life-saving effectiveness of the beacon. Some keepers, due to the profound, almost unearthly silence and deep solitude of their often remote stations, were also anecdotally known to develop rather eccentric habits or to form deep, almost familial bonds with the only other living creatures that shared their isolated world, frequently. This meant the local seabirds, or perhaps a resident lighthouse cat, kept not only for companionship but also for the very practical and crucial task of vermin control within the tower, protecting precious food supplies and even the lamp wicks themselves from hungry rodents. Now, historians and maritime archaeologists, as well as psychologists who study the effects of isolation, continue to debate and explore the precise and undoubtedly varied psychological impact of such long-term, often extreme, isolation on 19th-century lighthouse keepers. While official lighthouse logs and some published personal accounts often emphasize their remarkable resilience, their quiet contentment with the orderly, predictable routine of their duties, and their profound, unwavering sense of professional pride and duty, other anecdotal evidence, private letters, and fictional portrayals of lighthouse life frequently hint at the significant potential for profound loneliness, considerable mental strain, periods of deep melancholy, and even, in some tragic cases, descents into debilitating mental illness or alarming eccentricity, making broad, sweeping generalizations about the typical keeper's inner experience quite difficult and probably inaccurate. Each keeper's vigil was, in many ways, uniquely his own. The undisputed upside to this solitary, demanding life, one supposes, if you were of a certain temperament, was the almost certainly uninterrupted, truly panoramic ocean views, absolutely spectacular on a calm, sun-drenched day, with the sea like glass and distant sails on the horizon. The equally undisputed downside, of course, was that this same vast, beautiful, uninterrupted ocean was also your very loud, very wet, and, on far too many occasions, your incredibly angry and violent roommate, prone to throwing terrifying, destructive tantrums that could last for days on end, shaking the very foundations of your stone abode and making your world a terrifying vortex of wind and water. So, as you begin to settle deeper into your own comfortable, safe, and decidedly landlocked surroundings tonight, try to hold this evocative image gently in your mind, the lone, steadfast tower, a fragile finger of brilliant light bravely piercing the vast, indifferent darkness of the night sea, and within that tower, the keeper, perhaps just beginning his long day's methodical preparations, or stoically ending his lonely night's watch, bound by an iron sense of duty and the relentless, unforgiving rhythm of the wild sea. His story, the one we are about to explore, is one of quiet, often uncelebrated heroism, of meticulous, repetitive routine, and of a profound, almost sacred, trust that was placed in a single human being to keep the way safe for countless unknown others out on the dark waters. And it is into the intricate, often surprisingly complex details of that daily vigil that we will now gently, sleepily, and very carefully proceed. The long night, perhaps punctuated by the relentless shriek of gale force wind, the thunderous crash of unseen waves against the unyielding rock at the tower's base. Or maybe in stark contrast by the profound, almost unnerving calm of a flat, glassy sea stretching out under a silent canopy of brilliant, indifferent stars and has finally, inevitably, run its course. But now, as you, our steadfast and solitary 19th century lighthouse keeper, continue your lonely watch high in the lantern room, your senses keenly alert even as fatigue may gnaw at you, a subtle, almost imperceptible change begins to touch the eastern horizon, a gentle promise whispered across the dark waters. Your eyes, trained by countless nights of vigilant observation, are acutely attuned to the faintest, most nuanced shifts in the ambient light. You see it, that first, almost apologetic, ethereal blush of pearly gray on the distant edge of the world, then perhaps delicate, tentative streaks of pale pink and soft saffron begin to paint the underbellies of any lingering clouds. The brightest stars, those that have been your companions through the dark hours, start to dim, surrendering their nightly reign to a greater, approaching luminescence. Even if your isolated tower possesses a reliable chronometer or a well-maintained pendulum clock, a significant luxury not always guaranteed or perfectly accurate in such remote and often damp spots, your own internal rhythm, your deep, almost instinctual familiarity with the celestial dance of darkness and light, tells you with certainty that the crucial moment is rapidly approaching. The official regulations, those meticulously printed and bound instructions from the Lighthouse Board or Trinity House, are very clear, very strict, and leave no room for personal interpretation. The great lamp, the life-saving beacon, is to be extinguished precisely at the officially calculated time of local sunrise for your specific latitude and longitude. Not a single moment before, lest a ship still navigating by your guiding light in the treacherous pre-dawn gloom be prematurely endangered. And not a single moment after, lest precious, costly lamp oil be needlessly wasted and your professional diligence be called into serious question by the ever-watchful inspectors. As the sun's upper limb finally, gloriously, kisses the distant horizon, or as the precisely appointed minute arrives on your timepiece, you begin the careful, well-practiced, and almost reverent ritual of dousing the brilliant flame. You approach the massive, intricate lamp mechanism, perhaps still feeling the considerable ambient heat radiating from its many hours of continuous, powerful burning. If you are tending a sophisticated Fresnel lens assembly with its powerful, centrally located multi-wick argon-style burner, a common and highly efficient setup in many of the larger 19th century lighthouses, this is certainly not a simple case of flicking an off switch or blowing out a candle. You would need to systematically, and with great care, turn down the mechanical controls that regulate the oil flow to each of the concentric wicks, or operate the mechanism that smoothly retracts them from the flame. You must ensure that the flame diminishes steadily, cleanly, and without producing a sudden, unwelcome cloud of acrid, lens-blackening smoke that could compromise the optics for the next night. Perhaps you employ a special brass damper, a long-handled extinguisher cap, or a similar tool to gently, efficiently suffocate the final, lingering yellow glow of each individual flame. The very last wisp of smoke, carrying the distinctive, sharp smell of the just extinguished oil, curls upwards towards the lantern room's ventilator. And then, a new kind of quiet, a profound and almost startling stillness, descends upon the lantern room now that the subtle, continuous hiss, the gentle roar, or the mechanical sigh of the burning lamp has finally ceased its nightly song. But your vital work with the lamp is far from over for the morning. Now, while the various burner components are still quite warm, and any accumulated soot or oily residue from the night's burning is more easily dislodged and managed, the immediate and crucial post-extinguishing cleanup begins. This is absolutely critical for the lamp's continued reliable performance. You would, meticulously, with specialized tools, trim the charred, carbonized ends of the wicks, ensuring a perfectly clean, even surface for the next lighting, which is essential for a bright, steady, and smoke-free flame. Any soot that has inevitably formed on the burner itself, on the delicate glass chimney if it's that particular type of lamp, or on other metal parts of the apparatus, needs to be carefully and thoroughly wiped away with soft, clean cloths, chamois leathers, or fine brushes. The oil lines might need to be checked for any blockages, and the lamp's main oil reservoir would either be refilled immediately with fresh oil to be ready for the coming evening, or at least its current level carefully noted down in your official logbook so you can accurately track consumption and anticipate future supply needs. It's a bit like the morning after hosting a very, very important, incredibly small, and highly flammable dinner party for the entire maritime world. A party where the main dish was light itself. You've got to clean up all the little bits and pieces, all the residues of the night's feast, immediately and perfectly before things get truly messy, before anything becomes permanently stained or clogged, or, heaven forbid, before any part of the delicate system becomes unable to perform its life-saving duty flawlessly again just a few short hours later. It is a mainstream historical fact that lighthouse keepers in the 19th century were bound by strict, detailed official regulations to extinguish the main lamp of the lighthouse precisely at the moment of local sunrise. The established procedure for doing so typically involved carefully turning down the wicks of the powerful oil lamp, dousing the flames in a way that specifically minimized the production of smoke and soot which could dirty the lens, and then, almost immediately, meticulously cleaning the entire burner mechanism and trimming the wicks while the various components were still warm from the night's operation. This immediate and thorough servicing was absolutely essential to prevent clogging by congealed oil or hardened soot deposits, thereby ensuring the lamp's optimal performance, its consistent brightness, and its crucial reliability for the next night's illumination. With the lamp itself properly extinguished and attended to, your next vital task of the early morning is to protect the magnificent, incredibly valuable, and extraordinarily delicate Fresnel lens, that intricate beehive-like assembly of precisely ground and polished glass prisms, dioptric rings, and catadioptric lens elements that forms the very eye, the optical soul of the lighthouse. Throughout the daylight hours, the direct, unfiltered rays of the sun, if allowed to pass unchecked through this immensely powerful optical instrument, could cause significant and irreparable damage. The focused heat generated by the concentrated sunlight could potentially crack the delicate, custom-made glass elements over time, or, in a worst-case scenario, the entire lens assembly could act like a giant, unintended magnifying glass, concentrating the sun's energy to a single, intense focal point within the lantern room, and potentially starting a devastating fire. To prevent this calamitous possibility, you would meticulously and carefully draw heavy linen or canvas curtains, often white to reflect heat, all around the inside of the lens assembly. Or, in some lighthouse designs, you might carefully place specially fitted wooden shutters or thick fabric covers over each individual section of the precious glass. You certainly wouldn't want your multi-million-dollar in today's currency, at least precision optical instrument to accidentally barbecue the entire lighthouse tower, and yourself along with it, simply because you forgot to put up the special, custom-made sunblock curtains for the lens. Once the lens is safely shrouded from the sun's direct glare, you'd likely then proceed to open the lantern room's windows if they were designed to open, or its dedicated ventilation hatches, always mindful of the prevailing weather conditions. Of course, this would allow fresh air to circulate freely, clearing out any lingering oil fumes, the last traces of smoke from the extinguished lamp, and the considerable amount of condensation that would inevitably have built up on the glass panes of the lantern and the metalwork of the apparatus overnight, especially during cold, damp, or foggy weather. A good, consistent airflow was also essential to help preserve the delicate machinery of the lamp and the rotating mechanism if applicable, as well as the interior structure of the lantern room itself, from the insidious effects of damp, rust, and corrosion. For a quirky tidbit about this dawn ritual, some particularly dedicated, experienced, and almost supernaturally observant lighthouse keepers reportedly developed an uncanny, almost sixth sense for judging the precise moment of official sunrise, Even on heavily overcast, misty, or densely foggy mornings when the sun itself was entirely invisible behind a thick veil of cloud or mist, they prided themselves, often with a quiet, professional satisfaction recorded in their logs, on extinguishing the great light within a minute or two of the officially calculated time, guided perhaps by subtle shifts in the ambient light that would be imperceptible to an untrained eye. And that distinctive, slightly acrid, but not entirely unpleasant smell of the just extinguished oil lamp, that unique, pervasive perfume of warm metal, leftover lamp oil, and fresh, fine soot, was a defining and perhaps even strangely comforting olfactory signature that permeated the daily life and the very clothing of every dedicated wiki. If you, as our imagined keeper, have been on watch for the entire duration of the long night, or if you are just coming off the final, demanding pre-dawn watch, a profound sense of bone-deep weariness would undoubtedly be settling into your limbs and fogging your mind. But mixed with that understandable fatigue, there would also be the quiet, deep satisfaction of another night's vital duty successfully and flawlessly completed. Another period of perilous darkness safely illuminated for those anonymous souls out on the unpredictable sea. The sudden, enveloping quiet that descends upon the lantern room once the powerful lamp is finally out and its intricate mechanisms are stilled, offers a stark and welcome contrast to the focused energy, the constant low hum of its operation, and the intense vigilance required during the long, dark hours of the night watch. The sun is now officially ascendant. Its daily shift has well and truly begun. All right, sun, you're officially up now. You might think, perhaps with a weary smile, addressing your celestial counterpart as it climbs higher into the morning sky. Tag, you're it. My shift is finally over for a bit. Don't you go messing this one up. Okay, billions of dollars of global shipping, countless vessels, and innumerable human lives now depend entirely on your light for the next few hours. So, absolutely no pressure at all. Now, the precise degree of standardization in the exact day-to-day procedures for extinguishing, immediately servicing, and then carefully protecting the various complex and often quite different types of 19th-century lighthouse lamp mechanisms, such as the classic argand lamps, the later Carcel mechanical lamps, or the various powerful multi-wick burners used in conjunction with sophisticated Fresnel lenses. Across the different national lighthouse services like the British Trinity House, the American Lighthouse Board, or the French Service des Phares et Balises, versus the actual amount of keeper-specific learned technique, undocumented folk wisdom passed from keeper to keeper, or on-the-spot improvisation necessarily involved in their daily upkeep and minor repairs, is something that maritime historians, industrial archaeologists, and dedicated lighthouse preservationists continue to discern and debate. They do this by meticulously comparing the often idealized instructions found in official printed manuals with the frequently more candid, practical, and sometimes surprising details recorded in surviving personal keepers' logs, private correspondence, and later anecdotal accounts. The official rulebook didn't always cover every eventuality. The Great Flame is out now, its nightly task fulfilled. The precious, intricate lens is carefully draped and protected from the sun's powerful rays. The lantern room is aired and slowly returning to the ambient temperature of the new day. The lighthouse keeper's first major ritual of the daylight hours is complete. The sun now reigns supreme in the sky, and the tower, for a few brief hours at least, can rest its fiery, vigilant eye. But for the keeper himself, the day's demanding work, a different kind of meticulous, essential labor, is really only just beginning. The rising sun now firmly holds dominion over the vast expanse of sky and sea, its golden rays perhaps beginning to gently warm the ancient, weathered stones of your tall, solitary tower. The great lamp, your fiery, steadfast charge through all the long, dark hours of the preceding night, is now safely and correctly extinguished. Its intricate burner components, as we've seen, have been meticulously cleaned while still warm and are now standing by, ready and pristine for their next vital nightly duty. And its magnificent optical heart, The massive and incredibly delicate Fresnel lens, that marvel of 19th century engineering, is now carefully shrouded in its protective linen or heavy canvas curtains, shielded from the direct and potentially damaging glare of the daylight hours. But your essential work, keeper, here in the uppermost chamber of this lonely, windswept sentinel, is still far, far from done. Now, as the morning light floods the lantern room, begins one of the most vital, one of the most demanding, and certainly one of the most painstakingly meticulous of your daily rituals. The sacred, unending duty of ensuring that every single facet of glass that will soon project that life-saving beam out into the vast darkness of the coming night shines with an almost preternatural, an absolutely spotless, and an utterly unimpeded brilliance. At the very center of your world, both literally in the heart of the lantern room and metaphorically as the focus of your professional existence, stands the lens. If your lighthouse is a significant coastal or landfall beacon constructed or refitted in the 19th century, as ours is in this sleepy historical imagining, it is very likely to be graced with a magnificent Fresnel lens, that truly revolutionary invention of the brilliant French physicist Augustin Jean Fresnel, first developed in the 1820s. This isn't just a single simple piece of large curved glass, like the reflectors of older, less efficient lamps. Oh no, a Fresnel lens is a breathtakingly intricate, often beehive-like or multi-tiered structure, a dazzling, almost jewel-like assembly composed of hundreds, sometimes even thousands of precisely cut, individually shaped, and painstakingly polished glass prisms, dioptric refracting rings, and catadioptric reflecting and refracting elements. All of these components are meticulously arranged and mounted in a strong brass or bronze framework, designed with extraordinary mathematical precision to capture, concentrate, and powerfully direct every available ray of light from the relatively small single flame of your lamp into a single, intensely bright, highly focused, and incredibly far-reaching beam. Or, in the case of a flashing light, into a series of precisely timed revolving beams. It is an undeniable masterpiece of optical engineering, a delicate, immensely valuable, and surprisingly fragile marvel of its age. You are, in essence, the dedicated, full-time custodian of a gigantic, priceless, and irreplaceable crystal. Your official instructions are perfectly clear, and common sense would dictate no less. You are to treat this lens with the utmost care, as if it were the crown jewels themselves. If the crown jewels also had the crucial, life-altering job of saving 1,000 ships and tens of thousands of lives from being dashed to pieces on the treacherous rocks below. So, you probably need to be even more meticulously careful with it, if such a thing is humanly possible. And this beautiful, fragile marvel, this eye of the storm, is under constant, relentless assault from a host of enemies. The primary enemy, especially after a long night's burning of an oil lamp, is soot, even from a perfectly trimmed and well-behaved flame. A fine, almost invisible film of oily soot can quickly, insidiously accumulate on the inner surfaces of the lens. Then there's the ever-present, insidious sea salt, even on relatively calm, clear days. The air around a lighthouse is heavily laden with microscopic salt particles carried on the breeze, and during storms or heavy seas, a thick, opaque crust of dried salt spray can completely obscure the outer lantern panes and even the exterior surfaces of the lens itself if they are exposed. Add to this the fine, abrasive dust that can be whipped up by the wind, the occasional unfortunate insect that met its untimely end against the warm glass during the night, leaving a tiny, light-obscuring mark, and the condensation that can form on the inner surfaces of the myriad lens elements, especially with rapid temperature changes between night and day. Any imperfection, any smudge, any greasy film, any speck of dust on these critically important optical surfaces could scatter, absorb, or refract the precious light from the lamp, dramatically reducing its effective intensity, its clarity, and its vital visible range. A dirty, neglected lens could easily be the difference between a distant ship sighting your guiding light from 15 or 20 miles away, giving them ample time to fix their position and avoid danger, or only spotting it from a mere 5 miles out, by which time it might already be too late. The stakes could not be higher. Your cleaning arsenal for this crucial task is composed of simple, traditional materials, but they must be of the highest quality and used with extreme care. You have an array of soft, completely lint-free linen or fine chamois cloths, all meticulously washed, rinsed in fresh water if possible, and kept spotlessly clean, reserved exclusively for this purpose. For more stubborn marks, greasy films, or to achieve the highest possible polish, you might use a very fine, gentle polishing powder, something like whiting, a purified form of calcium carbonate, or chalk, or perhaps jeweler's rouge, a very fine iron oxide powder, applied extremely sparingly and with the greatest caution to avoid any scratching. Pure alcohol or distilled water, if your lighthouse supplies allow for such luxuries, might be used to dampen a cloth for removing particularly tenacious spots. Again, applied with utmost care so as not to damage the delicate optical glass or the special mounting putty or cement that holds the individual prisms securely in their framework. Specialized soft brushes, perhaps crafted from camel hair or fine bristles, would also be employed for carefully dusting the intricate nooks, crannies, and sharp edges of the complex lens assembly without risking any abrasion to the polished surfaces. And so, the daily ritual of cleaning the great lens begins. It's a slow, methodical, almost meditative process, requiring intense focus and a gentle, patient touch. You would typically work from the very top of the massive, multi-tiered lens downwards, following a strict system to ensure that every single piece of glass is attended to, and also to ensure that any dislodged dust or particles fall away from the sections you have already painstakingly cleaned. Each individual prism, each separate panel of curved or flat glass, receives your focused, loving attention. You might breathe gently on a section of glass. Your warm breath momentarily condensing on the cool surface will instantly reveal any slight film or smudge that might otherwise be invisible. Then, you wipe it with a soft, clean cloth, polishing it with a light, circular or sometimes a careful back-and-forth motion until it gleams with perfect, diamond-like transparency, utterly free of any blemish. You might have to contort your body into awkward positions, reaching carefully into the intricate, cage-like structure of the lens, perhaps balancing precariously on a small, specially designed ladder or a narrow interior platform within the confined, circular space of the lantern room. You must always be mindful not to lean too heavily on any part of the delicate framework or accidentally chip a fragile glass edge with a tool or a button on your coat. The unwavering goal is nothing less than absolute, flawless clarity, a state of optical perfection. The lantern room, during this daily intensive cleaning ritual, probably had to be maintained at a level of cleanliness exceeding that of a royal surgeon's operating theater. Because if a single errant speck of dust or a greasy fingerprint inadvertently left on the lens caused that vital guiding light to significantly fail in its duty or be dangerously diminished in its reach, the consequences were a wee bit more dramatic and far-reaching than a minor post-operative infection. More along the lines of, oops, there goes the entire East India Company's annual shipment of valuable tea, along with 300 unfortunate souls, all dashed upon the Dragon's Teeth rocks because of that one tiny smudge I missed. It is a mainstream historical fact that the daily and exceptionally meticulous cleaning of the lighthouse lens assembly, especially the delicate, intricate, and highly complex Fresnel lens, which became increasingly common and absolutely essential in major lighthouses throughout the course of the 19th century, as well as the numerous thick glass panes of the surrounding lantern room itself, was a primary, non-negotiable, and critically important duty for all lighthouse keepers. Lighthouse service manuals from all maritime nations universally and emphatically stressed that any accumulation of soot from the lamp, airborne dust, and crusted salt spray from the sea or internal moisture and condensation on these vital optical surfaces would significantly and detrimentally diminish the lamp's functional brightness, its clarity, and its effective visual range, thereby seriously compromising its fundamental life-saving function. Once the magnificent lens itself is deemed pristine, your diligent attention then turns to the large, thick, and robust glass panes of the lantern room that surround and protect it. These were often called the storm panes, and were designed to withstand the ferocious onslaught of wind, rain, and sea spray. These too must be kept spotlessly clean, both on their interior and, much more challengingly, on their exterior surfaces. Cleaning the interior surfaces is relatively straightforward, though it often involves reaching awkward angles and heights within the cramped space. But cleaning the exterior surfaces, that could be a very different and far more perilous proposition altogether, especially on a tall, isolated tower constantly exposed to the full, unpredictable force of the wind and sea. You might have to carefully venture out onto a narrow, often slippery, iron gallery or catwalk that typically encircled the lantern room, buffeted by strong, unpredictable winds, with the churning sea crashing far, far below your precarious perch. There, you would painstakingly wipe away layers of stubbornly encrusted salt, unsightly streaks of bird droppings, and general atmospheric grime, all while maintaining a firm grip and a clear head. Polishing the outside of the lantern glass on a particularly blustery or icy day was basically the 19th century equivalent of extreme sport window cleaning, with a thrilling, unwanted bonus chance of an unplanned, and almost certainly fatal, high-speed descent into the raging ocean if you weren't exceptionally careful, properly secured, and acutely aware of your surroundings. It was definitely not a job for anyone with even a mild fear of heights, a strong dislike of surprisingly aggressive and territorial seagulls, or a general tendency towards unfortunate clumsiness. For a quirky tidbit related to this demanding task, some official lighthouse instruction manuals from the period provided incredibly detailed, almost obsessively prescriptive, and sometimes rather sternly worded instructions on the precise methods and approved materials to be used for cleaning the delicate and costly Fresnel lens. They would often specify the exact types of cloths old, well-washed, and thoroughly rinsed linen was frequently preferred, as it was lint-free. The correct direction of wiping for certain types of prisms to avoid scratching the polished surfaces or dislodging them from their precise mountings, and would strictly forbid the use of many common contemporary household cleaning agents or any abrasive powders that could potentially etch or permanently damage the delicate optical glass or the special red lead putty or cement used to mount the individual prisms within their brass framework. Keepers who were found to have neglected this paramount duty of lens care, or who were discovered to be using improper, unauthorized techniques that risked damaging the lens, faced the prospect of severe official reprimands, hefty fines deducted from their meager pay, or even, in persistent or egregious cases, outright dismissal from the lighthouse service. The light was all, and the devoted cleaning didn't necessarily stop with just the glass. Many of the intricate lighthouse lamp mechanisms, the precisely engineered framework of the lens assembly itself, the hand railings within the lantern room, door handles, ventilation controls, and other various fittings often had components made of polished brass, bronze, or other bright metals. In the corrosive, salt-laden, and perpetually damp air of a working lighthouse, these metal surfaces would tarnish, oxidize, and corrode with astonishing and depressing speed, if not constantly and diligently attended to. So, another regular, if perhaps slightly less immediately mission-critical but still important task for the keeper was the patient polishing of all this bright work. This kept the machinery looking smart, maintained good operational order by preventing parts from seizing up, and also contributed to the overall sense of discipline, pride, and readiness within the station. It was a constant, never-ending, and often frustrating battle against the relentless, insidious encroachment of oceanic decay and atmospheric corrosion. Now, the exact formulations and proven efficacy of various specialized, proprietary cleaning agents or unique, perhaps secret, polishing compounds that were purportedly used by some highly experienced and resourceful, 19th-century lighthouse keepers for dealing with particularly stubborn lens stains, for achieving an exceptional, long-lasting polish, or for protecting brasswork from tarnish. Beyond the officially sanctioned simple spirits of wine alcohol, distilled water, or basic fine whiting powder, and whether these were officially approved experimental methods. Secret, traditional recipes passed down from keeper to keeper through an oral tradition, or simply later embellishments and romanticized accounts of lighthouse life, is often quite difficult to definitively verify from the surviving historical record. Official lighthouse service manuals from the period usually prescribed only the most basic, safest, and demonstrably non-damaging materials, primarily to avoid any possible risk of harm to the incredibly valuable and often irreplaceable lenses. Were there closely guarded, ancestral lens polishing techniques known only to the most dedicated wikis? The mists of time and the salty sea air keep some of those secrets well hidden from us. This relentless, daily, almost devotional pursuit of absolute optical clarity, this dedicated, painstaking polishing of countless individual glass surfaces, was far more than just a mundane housekeeping chore for the 19th century lighthouse keeper. It was a fundamental act of professional faith, a tangible testament to their unwavering dedication and their profound understanding of their duty. It was the essential groundwork that ensured that when darkness inevitably fell once more over the restless sea, their meticulously tended light, now pure, undiminished, and perfectly focused, would pierce the deepest gloom and offer its unwavering, life-saving promise of guidance, hope, and safety to all those navigating the dark and perilous waters. Every single gleaming, spotless facet of that magnificent lens was, in essence, a silent, luminous prayer for safe passage. The magnificent, multifaceted Fresnel lens now sparkles with an almost sentient brilliance. Every precisely angled prism and polished panel reflecting the early morning light with flawless, diamond-like clarity. This is a clear and undeniable testament to your diligent, almost reverent, daily polishing ritual. Keeper. But this dazzling crystal eye, however perfect it may be in its polished state, is merely a passive, albeit critically important, instrument. It needs a powerful, consistent, and unwavering heart of fire to give it true purpose, to allow it to project its life-saving, far-reaching beam out into the vast, often perilous darkness of the approaching night sea. And that fiery heart, dear sleepy keeper, is the flame, a flame that hungrily, relentlessly, and without fail, consumes its daily diet of carefully managed, precious oil and meticulously prepared, perfectly trimmed wicks. In the 19th century, the very fuel that fed these vital, life-saving flames evolved considerably, reflecting the technological advancements and changing resource availability of the era. In the earlier part of the century, one of the most highly prized and widely used illuminants, particularly for the most important coastal lights, was sperm whale oil. When properly refined, it burned with a remarkably bright, clear, steady, and relatively clean flame, making it an almost ideal fuel for lighthouse lamps where consistency and brilliance were paramount. However, sperm whale oil was also increasingly, prohibitively expensive, and its sourcing, as we now understand with our modern ecological and ethical sensibilities, came at a truly terrible and unsustainable cost to the great whales of the world's oceans. As the demand for lighthouse illumination grew and sperm whale oil became scarcer and pricier, other options were sought and implemented. Colza oil, which is derived from rapeseed, a member of the brassica family, like cabbage or mustard, became a significant vegetable-based alternative. It was reasonably effective, burned fairly well, and was more sustainable, though perhaps it didn't quite achieve the same luminous intensity as the best sperm oil. Lard oil, painstakingly rendered from animal fat, was often a cheaper option still, particularly in regions with significant livestock industries. However, lard oil could be problematic, especially in cold weather, as it had a frustrating tendency to congeal and thicken, thereby impeding its smooth flow to the lamp burner. It also often produced more smoke and soot if not burned with perfect wicks and optimal draft conditions, meaning more work for you in cleaning the lens and lantern. Then, around the mid-19th century, a truly significant game changer arrived on the scene in the form of mineral oil, essentially refined petroleum products like kerosene or paraffin. This new fuel, as refining techniques improved, was generally much cheaper than sperm whale oil, far more readily available in consistently large quantities, and capable of producing a very bright, steady, and reliable flame when used in properly designed and adapted lamps. However, the adoption of mineral oil also brought with it a new set of challenges and dangers. It was considerably more volatile than the traditional organic oils, meaning it had a much lower flash point and therefore posed a significantly greater risk of fire or even in poorly ventilated or improperly managed lamps. Explosion if it was handled carelessly or used in older lamp systems that weren't correctly modified for its specific burning properties. Switching your lighthouse from something like good old reliable, if increasingly controversial and costly whale oil, to this newfangled potent kerosene was probably a bit like upgrading from a trusty, predictable, and well understood horse drawn carriage to a very early, somewhat temperamental, and occasionally alarmingly explosive steam automobile. Undoubtedly faster, more efficient, and cheaper in the long run. But you had to read the detailed instruction manual very, very carefully indeed, and perhaps keep a well filled fire bucket or three handy at all times, or things could get rather exciting in a very, very bad way. Regardless of the specific type of oil being used in your particular lighthouse, vast quantities of it were needed to keep the lamp burning brightly through the long nights. This was especially true for those lighthouses situated in very remote, inaccessible locations that might only receive supply deliveries a few times a year, and particularly during the extended, dark nights of the harsh winter months. This precious oil was typically stored in large, reinforced metal tanks or sturdy, tightly sealed wooden barrels. These were often housed in a dedicated fire-resistant oil room located at the very base of the lighthouse tower for stability and safety, or sometimes in a separate, specially constructed oil house a short distance away from the main tower to minimize fire risk. And from these bulk storage containers, it was your daily, often backbreaking, and always crucial task, keeper, to transport the necessary quantity of oil up to the lamp room at the very top of the tall tower. This usually meant manually carrying heavy, specially designed metal cans or scuttles of oil, each weighing perhaps 50 pounds or even more when full, up many flights of narrow, winding, and often dimly lit stone or iron stairs. It was your unavoidable daily cardiovascular workout, whether you wanted it or not, a true test of strength and endurance. There were certainly no convenient elevators, dumbwaiters, or automated pumping systems in these sturdy 19th century stone tubes. And of course, throughout this arduous process, there was the ever-present risk of accidental spills, a messy and a slippery and dangerous hazard on the steep, narrow stairs, and a tragic, culpable waste of precious, carefully rationed fuel if a full can was dropped or inadvertently overturned. If the oil was the lifeblood of the lamp, then the wick was its very heart, the crucial, unassuming conduit that, through capillary action, diligently drew the fuel up from the lamp's reservoir to be consumed by the flame, transforming liquid into light. Wicks were typically made of tightly woven cotton threads, and their specific design and construction varied greatly depending on the particular type and size of the lamp they were intended for. Simpler, smaller lamps might use a single flat wick, much like an ordinary oil lamp, but the more powerful and sophisticated argand burners, often used in conjunction with the magnificent Fresnel lenses, employed one or more precisely formed tubular wicks, or even a complex series of concentric tubular wicks, all designed to allow for better airflow, more complete combustion, and thus the production of a much larger, brighter, steadier, and more smoke-free flame. As a keeper, you had to maintain a good stock of spare wicks of the correct type and size for your specific lamp, ensuring they were always kept perfectly clean, dry, and in excellent, ready-to-use condition. It is a mainstream historical fact that throughout the entire 19th century, the primary fuel source for lighthouse lamps underwent a significant transition. In the earlier decades, various organic oils such as sperm whale oil, highly prized for its bright flame but increasingly expensive and controversial, colza oil derived from rapeseed, and lard oil were commonly used. However, from approximately the mid-century onwards, mineral oil kerosene or paraffin, refined from petroleum, became increasingly prevalent due to its significantly lower cost, greater availability, and the consistently bright flame it could produce in suitably adapted lamps. Regardless of the specific fuel type being utilized at any given time or in any particular lighthouse, the meticulous daily trimming of the lamp wicks and the careful, diligent management of the entire fuel supply system and lamp burners were absolutely paramount and highly skilled duties for all lighthouse keepers. These tasks were utterly essential for ensuring a bright, steady, smokeless, and completely reliable light output throughout every single night. But simply having a supply of fresh wicks wasn't nearly enough. Each wick needed constant, expert, and meticulous attention. And this brings us to perhaps the most defining, the most frequently performed, and arguably one of the most critically important skills of any good wickie, that old nickname for lighthouse keepers. The delicate, precise art of wick trimming. An uneven, improperly trimmed, overly charred, or soot-encrusted wick was the absolute enemy of a good mono-reliable light. It would inevitably cause the flame to burn irregularly, to flicker annoyingly, to produce excessive oily smoke, which would quickly foul the pristine, painstakingly cleaned lens and dramatically diminish its brightness, and to consume the precious lamp oil inefficiently and wastefully. Therefore, at least once, and very often twice, every single day, typically just after extinguishing the lamp in the quiet of the early morning, and then again with utmost care and precision, just before preparing to light it again in the fading light of the evening, the wicks had to be perfectly trimmed. This crucial procedure involved using special, often long-handled and very sharp scissors that sometimes had a small flat plate or a little box attached to them, designed to catch the falling charred fragments of the wick, preventing them from contaminating the burner mechanism or the oil reservoir. Other dedicated specialized trimming devices were also developed for particular types of complex lamp burners. The unwavering goal was to remove every last bit of the hard, carbonized portion of the wick that had formed during the previous period of burning, thereby creating a perfectly level, clean, smooth, and uniform edge. This meticulously prepared edge was essential to ensure that the wick would draw the oil evenly and consistently, and that the flame would burn with a pure, bright, steady, and entirely smokeless incandescence. It truly required a surgeon's precision, an artist's delicate touch, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Getting that wick trimmed perfectly level and adjusted to just the right operational height within the burner was probably a more stressful and exacting daily task for a 19th century lighthouse keeper than it is for a modern celebrity chef trying to get a perfectly even, golden brown sear on a delicate piece of sea scallop, live on a high-pressure national television cooking competition. The stakes for the lighthouse keeper, after all, the safety of ships and the lives of sailors, were just a tad higher than a slightly overcooked or unevenly colored scallop. Beyond the wicks themselves, you, as the keeper, also had to ensure that the entire fuel system of the lamp was maintained in perfect working order. This meant regularly checking and cleaning the oil lines to ensure they were clear of any blockages or particles of dirt, and free from any deposits of congealed oil. This was especially important when using fuels like lard oil, particularly in cold weather, which could cause it to solidify. You had to ensure that the burner nozzles were clean and unobstructed, and that all the moving parts of the lamp's often intricate oil feed mechanism, if it had one, such as the clockwork-driven pumps found in sophisticated Carcel lamps, which were designed to provide a constant, even supply of oil to the wick, were properly cleaned, lubricated, and functioning with perfect smoothness and reliability. For a quirky tidbit that speaks to the keeper's intimate relationship with his lamp, some highly experienced and dedicated lighthouse keepers became so incredibly adept at the fine art of wick trimming and flame management that they could reputedly tell, merely by observing the subtlest changes in the flame's shape, its color, its height, or even by the almost imperceptible sound it made as it burned. If a particular wick needed immediate attention, or if the oil flow was not absolutely optimal, they developed an almost intuitive, deeply ingrained feel for their specific lamp, like a skilled musician with their most cherished and frequently played instrument. Furthermore, the careful and safe disposal of old, used wicks and any oily cleaning residues was also an important, if unglamorous, daily consideration. These materials were, of course, highly flammable and had to be stored or discarded in a way that posed absolutely no fire hazard to the lighthouse itself, a constant and pressing concern in a tall, isolated structure filled with large quantities of combustible oil and powerful burning flames. Now, the precise speed and the degree of uniformity with which the significant technological transition from predominantly organic illuminants, such as sperm whale oil or colza oil, to the generally more efficient and certainly more economical mineral oil kerosene or paraffin occurred across the various national lighthouse services and within lighthouses of differing sizes, ages, designs, and degrees of geographical remoteness during the course of the mid to late 19th century. And furthermore, the immediate and tangible impact that this significant fuel changeover had on the daily workload and specific routines of the keepers. The overall reliability and safety of the lamps themselves, and even on the design parameters for new lighthouse illuminating apparatus, is an area that lighthouse historians and historians of technology continue to meticulously refine and explore. This often involves piecing together evidence from archival supply records, surviving technical manuals and blueprints, contemporary reports on lamp performance and accidents, and the personal correspondence of keepers and lighthouse engineers. The great global oil changeover in lighthouses was a complex, gradual, and not always entirely smooth affair. And just imagine, for a moment, the sheer, unadulterated disaster of accidentally spilling a full, heavy can of precious lamp oil on those narrow, treacherous, winding stone stairs as you were hauling it up to the lantern room. Or worse, knocking one over in the pristine, meticulously kept lantern room itself, potentially contaminating the delicate lens or machinery. That wasn't just a frustratingly time-consuming and unpleasant cleaning job that would make the whole tower reek of oil for days on end. That was very likely grounds for a very stern, officially documented written reprimand from the district inspector. A significant and unwelcome deduction from your meager salary to cover the cost of the lost fuel, and perhaps even the eternal scorn and disapproval of the lighthouse supply officer who had to meticulously account for every last gill and pint of oil issued to your station. It was definitely not something that would reflect well on your annual performance review or contribute to your peace of mind. So, this daily, intricate dance with oil and wick, this constant, unwavering attention to the very source and sustenance of the vital light, was an absolutely fundamental, non-negotiable rhythm of your entire existence as a 19th-century lighthouse keeper. It was often greasy, physically demanding, sometimes frustrating, and occasionally even quite dangerous work, involving flammable materials and open flames in a confined space. But upon its flawless, consistent, and expert execution depended absolutely everything. The flame was your sacred life-saving charge, and you fed it, tended it, and nurtured it with unwavering diligence, practiced skill, and a profound, ever-present sense of solemn duty, ensuring that it would always burn brightly, steadily, and reliably against whatever overwhelming darkness the long night might bring. The lamp's precious fuel and its meticulously trimmed wicks are now perfectly prepared, standing in quiet readiness for the inevitable approach of dusk, a daily ritual of feeding the fire that has just been completed. The magnificent, multifaceted Fresnel lens, your tower's crystal eye that pierces the night, now gleams with an almost holy purity after its thorough morning ablutions, a testament to your diligent, almost reverent, daily polishing. But your daytime duties. Steadfast keeper, extend far, far beyond the confines of the lantern room at the tower's lofty apex. This entire robust column of weathered stone or steadfast iron, this unwavering sentinel standing lonely guard against the relentless siege of the tumultuous sea, is your sole and sovereign domain, and its very structure, along with any intricate and vital machinery it houses deep within its cylindrical embrace, demands your constant, vigilant, and knowledgeable care. It's time, as the sun climbs higher towards its zenith, to check the very heartbeat of your isolated tower, to ensure that its mechanical life and its physical integrity are sound for the trials ahead. If yours is a lighthouse that doesn't just shine a steady, unblinking, constant light out into the darkness, but rather flashes a distinctive, individually coded signal across the waves, perhaps a single flash every 10 seconds, or two quick flashes followed by a longer pause, a unique characteristic that allows mariners to precisely identify your specific station from afar and thus accurately determine their own perilous position. Then deep within the sturdy body of your tower, there is almost certainly a magnificent and often quite massive clockwork mechanism. This intricate, ingenious assembly of heavy, precisely counterbalanced weights, often several of them, strong, plaited cables or heavy linked chains, large, gleaming brass gears, intricately toothed cogs, and a carefully calibrated, rhythmically ticking escapement mechanism is the unseen, tireless engine. It is this mechanism that diligently, hour after hour, rotates the great lens assembly around the central lamp, or perhaps smoothly operates a complex set of shutters or screens around a fixed lamp to create that life-saving, uniquely identifying flash pattern. And this powerful mechanical heart, like any hard-working, weight-driven clock, needs its regular, laborious, daily winding. This was no gentle turning of a small, delicate key on a mantelpiece clock. It often involved the truly arduous, physically demanding labor of hand-cranking those incredibly heavy weights, sometimes weighing many hundreds of pounds, or even, in the case of the largest, most powerful first-order lighthouses, literal tons, all the way back up to the very top of their long, slow descent within the tower's central shaft or purpose-built weight wells. This demanding winding process might have to be performed every few hours for some older or particularly power-hungry systems, or perhaps just once a day for others that were more efficient or had a longer run time. Forget your modern gym membership or your fancy home fitness equipment. Your primary 19th century strength and endurance workout and keeper was quite literally keeping that life-saving light diligently turning and correctly flashing for all those upon the unpredictable sea. There was no sleek Peloton bike with motivational instructors here. This was pure, unadulterated, muscle-powered, gravity-defying rotational energy, a testament to your physical stamina. Beyond the sheer effort of winding, this complex clockwork demanded your careful, expert inspection each day. You'd listen intently with a practiced ear for any unusual grinding sounds, any squeaks or groans that might indicate a problem. You would meticulously check the intricate gears and toothed cogs for any signs of undue wear, missing or broken teeth, or improper meshing. You'd ensure the supporting cables or chains were running smoothly and evenly in their designated grooves, without any fraying or kinks. And very importantly, you would regularly and carefully apply specialized lubricating oil, a different, much finer, and often more expensive grade of oil than the type you used for the lamp itself, to all the crucial moving parts, the bearings and the pivots, keeping everything running with the quiet, rhythmic, and utterly dependable precision of a well-maintained chronometer. The steady, almost hypnotic tick-tock or gentle, powerful whirring of this great machine, hidden away in the tower's core, was, in many ways, the true reassuring heartbeat of your lonely stone domain. It is a mainstream historical fact that, quite apart from their primary and most visible lamp-tending duties, 19th century lighthouse keepers were comprehensively and officially responsible for the daily and ongoing maintenance of the entire lighthouse structure and all of its associated, often complex, machinery. This typically included the laborious daily or sometimes multi-daily winding and the regular careful lubrication of intricate clockwork mechanisms that rotated the massive optics for those lighthouses that displayed flashing or revolving characteristics. It also involved the diligent inspection and timely repair of the tower building itself, frequent and extensive painting to protect it against the harsh marine elements, and ensuring that any fog signal apparatus, if the station was so equipped, was in perfect instant operational readiness at all times. Then there was the physical integrity of the tower itself to consider. Your stone or iron home, your workplace, your entire world, constantly battered and besieged by wind, rain, corrosive salt spray, and sometimes truly colossal structure-shuttering waves. Part of your midday routine, certainly whenever the weather permitted, would involve a thorough visual inspection of the entire edifice. On the exterior, you'd be looking with a critical eye for any new cracks that might have appeared in the thick stonework or the pointing of the mortar between the blocks. You'd check for any loose or damaged fittings on the lantern gallery or the access ladders, signs of rust or erosion at the tower's vulnerable base where it met the rock or the sea, or any damage to the vital lightning conductor that protected the tower from strikes during thunderstorms. The relentless, powerful assault of the natural elements was a constant, unending battle that required your unceasing vigilance. Inside the tower, your inspections would continue. You'd look for any signs of dampness penetrating the walls, or water ingress around window seals or door frames, a leaky window, a persistent drip from the ceiling, moisture seeping insidiously through the thick stone walls after a prolonged storm, any of which could lead to much bigger structural problems. Rot, or an unhealthy living environment if not identified and addressed promptly. And then, of course, there was the painting, the seemingly endless, almost Sisyphean task of keeping the lighthouse properly painted. Lighthouse towers were very often painted a brilliant white to serve as clear, easily identifiable day marks for shipping during daylight hours, or sometimes in distinctive horizontal bands of bright color, red and white, or black and white, for the same reason, allowing mariners to distinguish one lighthouse from another along a coastline. This paint was not merely for aesthetics. Pretty as it might have looked against a blue sky, it was an absolutely crucial protective layer, shielding the stone or iron from the corrosive effects of the salt-laden sea air and the harsh, unremitting weather, keeping the entire tower, from its very base up to the underside of the lantern room, properly painted, caulked, and sealed was a huge, demanding, and ongoing undertaking. It was rather like the old, slightly rueful saying about the task of painting the Forth Bridge in Scotland. By the time you finally finished one complete coat on one side of the structure, the other side, where you had started, was probably already due for a fresh application. But this lighthouse painting was often far more vertical, considerably windier, much more exposed, and came with a significantly higher chance of being aggressively dive-bombed by a territorial seagull who clearly and vocally disapproved of your choice of whitewash, or perhaps just your off-key singing voice as you worked. And you meant, of course, throughout your day, there were the more mundane but equally necessary tasks of general housekeeping and minor running repairs, keeping the many flights of narrow winding stone or iron stairways meticulously swept clean and entirely free of any oil drips. A serious slipping hazard. Dust or other debris was essential for your own safety as you moved up and down the tower countless times a day. Your own small, often Spartan, living quarters needed to be kept as clean, tidy, and orderly as humanly possible in such a confined, isolated, and work-focused environment. And you absolutely had to be a proficient, resourceful handyman, a veritable jack-of-all-trades. A heavy storm shutter might be banging loose in the fierce wind, threatening to tear away. A small section of lead guttering around the lantern gallery might have come adrift. A window pane in a lower room might have cracked under the relentless force of a rogue wave during the night. A vital rope or pulley in the supply hoist mechanism might be showing dangerous signs of wear and tear. You couldn't just pick up the 19th century equivalent of a telephone and call a local repairman or a specialized contractor. You were the local repairman, the on-site engineer, the first responder, Equipped with a basic but essential set of tools, your accumulated experience, and your own innate ingenuity, you were expected to diagnose the problem, devise a solution, and fix what was broken, often with limited materials, to maintain the safety and functionality of your vital station. The light, as we know, was your primary tool for guiding ships safely. But what about those all too frequent times when visibility dropped to near zero, when dense, impenetrable fog, heavy, slanting rain, or blinding, swirling snowstorms enveloped your tower, rendering even the most powerful and perfectly polished lamp completely useless to mariners who might be dangerously close but unable to see its beam? This is where the fog signal, if your lighthouse was equipped with one, came into play as a life-saving alternative. Ensuring its absolute readiness was another critical midday duty. Depending on the era of your lighthouse's construction and the specific importance and location of your station, this fog signal could be a massive, deep-toned bronze bell, designed to be rung either laboriously by hand at precise intervals or by a dedicated clockwork striking mechanism. It might be a heavy, resonant gong, producing a different kind of warning sound, or even, at some particularly critical or fog-prone stations, actual cannons that were loaded and fired at regular, prescribed intervals, their percussive blasts hopefully carrying far through the murk to warn ships of nearby land or navigational hazards. Later in the 19th century, more powerful and sophisticated mechanical fog signals were gradually introduced, such as steam-powered whistles or booming horns, or compressed air-driven diaphones and sirens, capable of producing incredibly loud, penetrating, and distinctive blasts that could, hopefully, be heard for many miles, even through the thickest, most disorienting weather. Your daily checks for these systems would involve perhaps polishing the bell to ensure its clearest possible tone, testing the striking mechanism of a mechanical fog bell, ensuring that any gunpowder for cannons was kept perfectly dry, secure, and ready for immediate use, or carefully checking the boiler, fuel supply, water levels, and pressure gauges for any steam or compressed air apparatus. Actually testing the fog cannon, one easily imagines, yes, was probably a rather delicate balance between confidently ensuring it was in perfect working order. Right, that certainly made a very loud and satisfactory bang, and anxiously hoping you hadn't just accidentally declared war on that unsuspecting fishing boat that was innocently passing a bit too close in the mist, or given a collective heart attack to an entire nesting colony of very sensitive puffins on a nearby cliff face. Precision and good judgment were key, even in the business of making a very, very loud noise. For a quirky tidbit about the diverse skills of these keepers, some particularly observant and intellectually curious lighthouse keepers became quite accomplished amateur meteorologists or dedicated naturalists, purely out of the unique necessities and quiet opportunities afforded by their isolated, often exposed stations. Stationed for long periods in these remote locations, they meticulously recorded daily weather patterns, wind strengths and directions, cloud formations, the timing of tides, significant bird migrations passing their tower, or any unusual marine life they might have sighted from their lofty perch. These detailed, handwritten observations, often kept diligently alongside their official lighthouse operational logs, sometimes provided unexpectedly valuable data that was later shared with and contributed to emerging scientific societies, meteorological offices, or government surveys, adding an unanticipated and often uncredited scientific dimension to their lonely, dutiful vigil. Now, the precise level of formal technical engineering knowledge or specialized mechanical training that was officially expected of, versus what was actually possessed by the average 19th century lighthouse keeper, particularly when it came to understanding, independently maintaining, and competently repairing the increasingly complex mechanical and optical apparatus found in lighthouses, such as intricate dioptric revolving mechanisms for lenses or the early, often temperamental, steam-powered fog signal engines, and furthermore, how much these keepers truly relied on detailed written instruction manuals versus practical, hands-on training received from their predecessors or visiting inspectors, or simply upon their own innate mechanical aptitude and hard-won problem-solving skills, developed through years of isolated experience, is a fascinating and ongoing topic of interest and research for historians of technology. Maritime studies and 19th century labor history, they were expected to be quite the resourceful polymaths, often with minimal formal training for such complex systems. So, you can see that the midday hours for our dedicated lighthouse keeper were far from idle or restful. They were typically filled with the rhythmic sounds of winding heavy gears, the pervasive smell of fresh paint or lubricating oil, the careful probing inspection of weathered stone and sturdy metal, and the constant underlying awareness that every single part of this isolated tower, from its deepest wave-battered foundations to the very tip of its vulnerable lightning rod, and every intricate piece of delicate machinery housed within it, had to be kept in absolute, perfect working order at all times. The very heartbeat of the tower, its complex mechanical life and its enduring structural integrity, was quite literally in your capable, diligent hands. Keeper, ensuring that it would stand strong against the elements and function flawlessly when darkness inevitably fell once more, and the lives of others depended on it. The robust stone or iron tower now stands strong and true, its intricate internal machinery wound, oiled, and ticking with the faithful, rhythmic heartbeat of a well-cared-for and absolutely essential mechanism, all thanks to your diligent and meticulous midday ministrations. Keeper, every single pane of glass in the mighty lantern, from the smallest prism of the Fresnel lens to the largest storm pane, now gleams with an almost holy purity, ready to unleash its guiding life-saving beam when darkness next descends. But even the most remarkably self-sufficient and resourceful keeper, stationed in the most impressively engineered and sturdily built tower, cannot exist as an island entire of itself, at least not indefinitely, not without some connection, however tenuous, to the wider world. You are, after all, a speck of dedicated, dutiful humanity, perched precariously on the very edge of the vast, indifferent, and often perilous ocean. And your vital connection to that wider world, your continued ability to perform your sacred duty, indeed your very survival and sanity, often depends entirely on the infrequent, sometimes frustratingly delayed, but always profoundly welcome sight of your lonely lifeline, the lighthouse supply tender. For many long weeks, sometimes even for seemingly endless, weary months, especially if your assigned station is a remote, wave-lashed rock lighthouse miles from the nearest inhabited shore, or an exposed, wind-swept headland that is frequently cut off from the mainland by impassable storms and treacherous seas. Your only consistent company might be the echoing, mournful cries of the seabirds, the relentless, thunderous roar or the soft, sighing whisper of the waves against the unyielding rock, and the ceaseless, often chilling, whistle or howl of the wind as it scours your lonely domain. The sense of profound isolation, of being utterly cut off from the bustling world of humanity, can be immense, almost palpable, settling upon your spirit like a heavy, damp cloak. You would scan the vast, empty horizon daily, a deeply ingrained habit, as much a part of your routine as breathing, your eyes searching with a mixture of hope and resignation for that first telltale smudge of smoke from a distant steamer's funnel, or the distant hopeful glint of a sail that might herald the tender's approach. In the days, or even weeks, leading up to an expected, though never entirely certain, visit from the supply vessel, you would be meticulously preparing your outgoing official reports for the Lighthouse Board or Trinity House, perhaps a carefully penned, heartfelt letter to a distant, cherished loved one, and a detailed list of urgently needed supplies, tools, or repairs for your station. And then, one momentous day, after countless false alarms where a passing cloud shadow or a distant flock of birds momentarily tricked your hopeful eyes, there it is, a tiny, almost insignificant speck on the far horizon that slowly, agonizingly over many hours, resolves itself into the familiar, sturdy, and oh-so-welcome shape of the tender, the specially designated, robustly built vessel tasked with the vital mission of servicing the lighthouses in your particular district. A powerful wave of something akin to profound relief, genuine excitement, and perhaps even a touch of nervous anxiety might wash over you. The arrival of the tender is a major, almost festival-like event, a brief, intense, and welcome flurry of activity that joyfully shatters the deep, often oppressive monotony of your solitary, highly structured routine. For those lighthouse keepers stationed on easily accessible land-based stations, perhaps with a convenient small jetty or sheltered cove nearby, the process of receiving supplies might be relatively straightforward, if still physically demanding. But for those of you perched precariously on isolated, wave-swept rocks or remote, inhospitable islets, the transfer of essential goods and any personnel could be an incredibly dangerous, highly skilled, and nerve-wracking operation. Often, there was simply no safe place for the larger tender itself to dock or even to anchor too closely. It would have to stand off a short, safe distance, riding the swell, while a smaller, more maneuverable surf boat or a sturdy longboat, expertly handled by the experienced tender's crew, attempted to make the treacherous passage through breaking waves and strong currents to reach the lighthouse landing stage. If one even existed, barrels of precious lamp oil, heavy crates of tinned provisions, cumbersome sacks of coal or flour, and delicate, irreplaceable spare parts for the complex lamp mechanism, all had to be carefully, often manually, hoisted ashore. Sometimes this was accomplished using a derrick crane permanently attached to the lighthouse tower itself, its long arms swinging out over the churning water. Other times, goods were passed hand over hand along a swaying, precarious rope bridge slung between the tender's boat and the slippery rocks, all while battling unpredictable waves, powerful tidal currents, and slick algae-covered landing surfaces. Imagine, for a moment, trying to successfully catch and secure a heavy, unwieldy swinging barrel of highly flammable lamp oil, being passed to you on a thick, greasy rope in the teeth of a force 6 gale, while you are perched precariously on a narrow, wet, seaweed-strewn rock ledge with the icy, unforgiving waves crashing just inches below your worn leather boots. It certainly wasn't the 19th century equivalent of a convenient, contactless Amazon Prime drone delivery. That's for absolute sure. It was much more like participating in an extreme, high-stakes version of grocery shopping, with a very real and ever-present chance of an unscheduled, bone-chilling, and potentially life-threatening swim in the turbulent sea. Or worse, being crushed by a falling crate. And what precious, life-sustaining cargo did this vital lifeline bring to your isolated outpost first and foremost? Of course, there was food. Since fresh provisions like meat, fruit, and vegetables were often impossible to keep for long in such isolated, damp conditions without modern refrigeration, the bulk of your supplies would necessarily consist of durable non-perishables, sturdy barrels of heavily salted beef or pork, large sacks of flour for baking your own rough bread, rice, dried beans and peas, crates of incredibly hard hardtack biscuits, the infamous long-lasting ship's bread, famously durable if not exactly a gourmet delight, tins of preserved coffee beans or tea leaves, casks of sugar and salt, and perhaps some relatively hardy root vegetables like potatoes, onions, and turnips if they could be kept from sprouting or rotting during the voyage and subsequent storage. A rare and cherished treat might be a small, carefully hoarded quantity of fresh fruit or vegetables. A most welcome change from the monotonous diet, if the tender's journey from port had been short and the weather particularly kind. Equally vital, naturally, were the specialized supplies for the lighthouse itself, more barrels of that precious, carefully graded lamp oil, fresh supplies of new wicks of various types and sizes for the lamp, spare glass chimneys if your lamp used them, soft lens cleaning cloths and approved polishing compounds, cans of thick paint and whitewash for the endless upkeep of the tower, essential tools, ropes, and perhaps crucial, custom-made spare parts for the intricate lamp mechanism or the complex revolving clockwork. But for many a lonely, news-starved keeper, the most eagerly anticipated and emotionally significant part of the cargo was undoubtedly the mail. Letters from beloved family members far away, perhaps containing long-awaited news of births, deaths, marriages, or just the simple, comforting, everyday minutiae of life back in the bustling world of men from which you were so cut off. Newspapers and magazines, even if they were many weeks or even several months old by the time they finally reached your isolated hands, were devoured from cover to cover, every advertisement, every small notice, providing a precious, if somewhat delayed, link to the ongoing events, the political debates, and the evolving ideas of the wider world. And, of course, there would invariably be official correspondence from the Lighthouse Board or the relevant authorities, new instructions, updated regulations, circulars of information, perhaps a commendation for good service, or even, heaven forbid, the dreaded official reprimand for some perceived dereliction of duty. Getting mail delivered by the tender in the 19th century was probably far more thrilling, more emotionally charged, and certainly more eagerly anticipated than finding a winning lottery ticket or your latest impulsive online shopping binge arriving by courier today. A 3-month-old newspaper from the capital city. Absolutely edge of your seat. Can't put it down. Page-turning stuff when you've only had the mournful cries of seagulls and the occasional distant, silent passing ship to converse with for the past 6 or 7 isolated weeks. It is a mainstream historical fact that lighthouse supply tenders, which were specially designated and robustly equipped vessels operated by the various national lighthouse authorities, such as Trinity House in Britain or the UMAS, lighthouse establishment, were absolutely essential for the ongoing sustenance and continued operational capability of all lighthouse keepers, but particularly for those heroic individuals stationed at dangerously isolated offshore rock lighthouses or exceptionally remote coastal stations. These hardy tenders typically delivered vital provisions such as preserved food and fresh water, if not available on station, fuel for the lamp such as oil, or coal for steam-powered fog signals, mail, newspapers, tools, spare parts, and other necessary supplies. The schedule for these visits could range from weekly or monthly for the more easily accessible stations, to only a crucial few times a year for the most remote, weather-beaten, and difficult-to-reach locations, with all deliveries being heavily and often frustratingly dependent on prevailing weather patterns and unpredictable sea conditions. Sometimes, the tender also brought significant personnel changes. For a multi-keeper station, its arrival might mean that one keeper was going on a much-needed, eagerly anticipated period of shore leave, while another, perhaps refreshed and restocked with news from civilization, returned to duty. For a solitary keeper, the tender's visit might herald the very end of their long, contracted term of service at that particular lonely station and the arrival of their hopeful, or perhaps apprehensive, replacement. The precious time the tender actually spent at your station was usually disappointingly brief, strictly dictated by the ever-watchful weather, the state of the tides, and the pressing need for the vessel to service other lighthouses along its designated route before conditions worsened. But those few short hours of direct human interaction with the tender's crew, the chance to exchange news and stories, to share a quick, freshly brewed cup of coffee if time and conditions allowed, to hear fresh voices and see new, friendly faces, were incredibly precious. A fleeting, cherished moment of human connection in a life largely, and often overwhelmingly, defined by profound solitude and silence. And then, all too soon, the frantic transfer of goods and mail would be complete. You'd watch with a heavy heart as the tender weighed its anchor or expertly cast off its mooring lines, its departing steam whistle or the fading shouts of its crew a poignant, almost mournful sound as it slowly but surely pulled away from your rock or headland. You'd watch it growing smaller and smaller on the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean, until it finally, inevitably, disappeared completely over the distant, watery horizon. It was always a bittersweet moment, no doubt a surge of relief at being resupplied and reconnected, however briefly, but also the renewed, perhaps even sharper and more acute, sense of your profound, encompassing isolation settling back and around you like the inevitable evening mist. For a quirky tidbit illustrating the challenges some particularly resourceful lighthouse keepers, especially those stationed on extremely exposed and dangerous rock stations where direct landings by boat were frequently impossible for many weeks or even entire months on end due to consistently rough seas. Developed quite ingenious, if sometimes rather desperate, signals or complex systems to communicate their most urgent needs or their operational status to the supply tender if it could only manage to pass by at a tantalizing but unreachable distance. This might involve elaborate flag codes flown from the tower's mast, specific patterns flashed with a handheld signal lamp if they had one, or even in the most extreme and pressing circumstances, important messages sealed tightly in bottles or tied securely to small, weighted buoys that were then hopefully and skillfully retrieved by the tender's observant crew as they sailed past. The arrival of the tender, however it made contact, was also often the keeper's only regular and reliable chance to send out his meticulously kept official logbooks, his detailed daily weather reports, and his carefully compiled requisitions for the next delivery cycle to the distant, impersonal authorities who governed his lonely world. Once the precious tender was finally gone from sight, your immediate and vital task would be to carefully check, meticulously inventory, and securely stow all your newly received supplies, making careful, almost miserly plans for how to make them last, often for an unpredictable period until the next uncertain visit. Rationing was not just a word, it was a constant daily reality of lighthouse life. For those keepers fortunate enough to be stationed on land-based lighthouses with a small patch of cultivable soil, a little vegetable garden, painstakingly tended, could provide a welcome and healthy supplement to the often monotonous and salty diet of preserved meats and hardtack biscuits. Some might even keep a few hardy chickens for fresh eggs, or perhaps even a solitary goat for milk, if official regulations and the available space allowed for such luxuries. Fishing from the rocks or from a small, carefully maintained station boat if one was provided, and conditions permitted its use, could also provide a vital source of fresh protein. Foraging for edible seaweeds, shellfish from the rock pools at low tide, or any hardy wild greens that might cling to life on an exposed headland could also occasionally add a variety to the keeper's diet. Resourcefulness, thrift, and a talent for improvisation were not just admirable virtues. They were absolutely essential survival skills in this isolated existence. You didn't just casually pop down to the local shops if you unexpectedly ran out of coffee, sugar, or flour. You learned, by necessity, to make that one precious bag of beans or that carefully hoarded sack of meal last as if it were made of solid gold. Or you quickly developed a sudden, very intense, and perhaps not entirely voluntary, appreciation for the dubious culinary delights of things like boiled seaweed tea or thrice rebrewed coffee grounds. Now, the actual nutritional adequacy, the day-to-day variety, and the long-term sufficiency of the standard provisions and official rations that were typically supplied to 19th-century lighthouse keepers by the authorities. And furthermore, how significantly this often heavily salt-preserved, tinned, and dried goods-based diet might have impacted their overall physical and even their mental health and well-being, especially for those keepers stationed on the most remote, storm-bound, and infrequently supplied stations where fresh food was an exceptionally rare and fleeting luxury, is a topic that historians of medicine, dietetics, and maritime social history continue to actively examine and earnestly debate. They often must rely on frustratingly sparse personal accounts, sometimes idealized official ration lists which may not accurately reflect what was actually delivered or consumed, and the occasional medical reports from the period to piece together a clearer picture. Did they get enough vitamin C to ward off scurvy, or just enough hardtack and salt beef to merely survive until the next boat? The answers are not always clear. This lonely lifeline, the lighthouse supply tender, was therefore so much more than just a mundane delivery boat bringing groceries and lamp oil. It was your tangible, physical link to civilization, your primary source of sustenance and operational capability, your carrier of vital news, your bringer of precious human connection, however fleeting. Its anxiously awaited arrival was a veritable festival, a moment of intense activity and renewed hope. Its inevitable departure was a poignant return to the profound, encompassing quiet of your steadfast, solitary vigil, armed now, at least, with fresh supplies and recent memories to help you continue your vital, unending work of keeping the bright light burning against the vast, indifferent, and ever-present darkness of the sea. The reassuring sight of the lighthouse supply tender, that vital smoke-belching or sail-powered link to the bustling world beyond your isolated rock or remote headland, has now long since vanished over the vast, restless, and often empty horizon. Its comforting, noisy presence, which so briefly shattered your profound solitude, is now just a lingering, cherished memory and, more tangibly, a welcome replenishment of essential goods carefully and securely stowed away in your tower's precious, limited storerooms. Your isolated world keeper has once again returned to its familiar, profound, and sometimes almost deafening quiet, broken only by the ceaseless conversation of wind and wave. But amidst all the demanding physical tasks of meticulously cleaning the great lens until it shines like a captured star, carefully fueling the powerful lamp for its nightly vigil, and diligently maintaining the steadfast structural integrity of the tower itself, there is another equally vital, if perhaps less outwardly strenuous, but no less exacting, daily duty that demands your meticulous, unwavering, and scrupulously honest attention, the careful and unwavering art of record-keeping. It's time now, as part of your structured and disciplined day, perhaps after the main physical chores are done, and before the evening preparations for lighting up begin, to commune with your trusty inkpot, your well-sharpened pen, and your official logbook, to meticulously chronicle the ongoing life of your guiding light, and to diligently document the ever-shifting, often capricious moods of the surrounding, formidable sea. Before you, perhaps laid out on a sturdy, small wooden desk, or a simple utilitarian table, located in your cramped but orderly living quarters or within a designated watchroom near the base of the lantern, lies the official lighthouse logbook. This is no flimsy personal diary intended for your idle, private jottings or sentimental reflections. It is a substantial, official-looking volume, probably quite large and reassuringly heavy, perhaps bound in durable dark leather or tough, water-resistant canvas to withstand the damp sea air. Its many pages are likely made of thick, good-quality paper, often pre-ruled with specific columns and clearly printed headings, all supplied directly to you by the Lighthouse Board, Trinity House, or whatever other august and somewhat intimidating governmental body oversees the operation of your particular station and, by extension, your very existence here. This logbook is, in essence, a crucial legal document. It is a formal, continuous, and minutely detailed record of your professional stewardship of this vital maritime aid, and its contents will be subject to periodic, unannounced, and undoubtedly very thorough inspection by your superiors. Every entry must be accurate, legible, and truthful. With your quill pen, carefully sharpened to a fine point with your pocket knife. Or perhaps later in the 19th century, with a more modern steel-nibbed dip pen that offers a more consistent line, you carefully charge the nib with dense, black ink from your well-stoppered inkpot. Then, with slow, deliberate strokes, you begin to make your entries for the previous night's watch and the events of the morning just past. First, and of paramount importance, are the records pertaining to the lamp itself. You must note the exact, officially mandated time you first lit the great lamp at dusk on the previous evening, as per the specific regulations for your station and the time of year. And then, with equal precision, you record the exact time you finally extinguished it at the break of dawn this very morning. You meticulously calculate and record the precise amount of precious lamp oil consumed during the night's long burning, a figure measured carefully from the lamp's reservoir or supply tank. You detail any wick trimming or complete changes of wicks that were performed during the night. Noting the time and the reason, you record the diligent cleaning of the burner mechanism. You might also make a brief, professional note on the overall quality and character of the light produced throughout the dark hours. Was it consistently bright, clear, and steady? Or were there any unwelcome issues with smokiness, unexplained flickering, or any irregularities in its distinctive flash pattern? If yours is a flashing light, every detail matters. Next, and of equally immense importance, are your systematic weather observations. These are typically required by your official instructions to be recorded at set, regular intervals throughout the entire 24-hour period, perhaps every 4 hours, or at the formal change of each watch if you have assistance. With a practiced eye, you note the prevailing wind direction, north, south, east, west, and all the subtle points in between, like north-northeast or southwest by west. You then make your best, most experienced estimate of its current strength, perhaps using the descriptive terms of the Beaufort scale if you've been trained in its use, describing it as anything from a light air or a gentle breeze to a fresh gale, a strong storm, or even, heaven forbid, a full hurricane force wind. You meticulously record the state of visibility. Was it perfectly clear with distant horizons sharply defined, or somewhat hazy? Or did a thick, disorienting fog roll in if it was foggy? You'd note its perceived density. Could you still see a mile out to sea? Or just half a mile? Or was visibility reduced to merely a few hundred yards from the tower, rendering your powerful light almost useless? Was there rain, sleet, snow, or perhaps even hail? You'd also carefully note the general state of the sea itself. Was it calm and glassy like a mirror? Or showing a moderate rolling swell? Or was it rough and dangerously choppy with whitecaps? Or perhaps even terrifyingly high and breaking furiously against your tower's foundations? And, crucially, you would record the precise reading from the station barometer, that vital instrument for forecasting impending changes in the weather, noting whether the atmospheric pressure was rising, indicating improving weather, falling rapidly a sure sign of an approaching storm, or remaining steady. The ambient air temperature, and perhaps even the sea temperature if you had the means to measure it, would also be dutifully and legibly logged. You were, in effect, the lighthouse's own dedicated, highly observant, and entirely on-site 24/7 weather forecasting app. But instead of fancy animated graphics, satellite imagery, and chirpy synthesized voices, you had your meticulous, often beautifully spidery, handwriting, a few simple but reliable scientific instruments, and a very keen, weather-wise practiced eye for accurately interpreting exactly what particular shade of ominous, brooding gray the ever-angry sea had decided to present itself as on that particular day. You would also be required to record any significant ship sightings during your watch. This would include the type of vessel observed. Was it a sailing ship? Perhaps a schooner, a bark, or a full-rigged clipper? Or was it a modern steamship, belching smoke, or just a small local fishing boat or a naval frigate on patrol? Its apparent course and direction of travel, the approximate time it passed your station, and any signals it might have made to your lighthouse, or any signals you might have made back to it in return. Perhaps with signal flags during the day or a handheld lantern at night. This information could prove to be absolutely vital if a particular vessel later went missing, was reported overdue in its port of destination, or was involved in a subsequent maritime incident. And finally, there was usually a column or a section in the logbook designated for unusual occurrences or general remarks. Here, you would meticulously note anything out of the ordinary that had happened during your watch. This could be anything from a sudden, inexplicable, and disorienting fog bank rolling in from a seemingly clear sky, a large, confused flock of migrating birds tragically striking the lantern glass during the night, a sadly common and distressing event for many keepers, unusual pieces of wreckage or debris washed ashore after a storm, distant flares, rockets, or other distress signals sighted out at sea, requiring immediate action if possible, strange, unaccountable lights observed on the water at night, or, very rarely, and probably with a mixture of alarm and excitement, the unexpected arrival of human visitors, a highly unlikely event on an isolated rock lighthouse. But perhaps more possible, if still infrequent, on a more accessible land-based station. It is a mainstream historical fact that the meticulous and regular keeping of an official daily logbook was a compulsory, non-negotiable, and critically important duty for all 19th century lighthouse keepers, a task that was strictly mandated and closely monitored by the governing lighthouse authorities in every maritime nation. These detailed, handwritten logs typically documented a wide range of essential operational information. This included, but was not limited to precise lamplighting and extinguishing times, the exact amount of fuel oil, gas, etc., consumed during each burning period, specific details of any wick trimming performed or new wicks installed, notes on the regular cleaning of the lens and lantern apparatus, comprehensive records of any repairs or maintenance carried out on the lamp itself, the complex clockwork machinery for revolving lights, or the physical structure of the lighthouse tower. Crucially, these logbooks also contained systematic, regular observations of prevailing weather conditions, such as wind speed and direction, atmospheric visibility, precipitation, the state of the sea, barometric pressure readings, and ambient temperature. Furthermore, keepers logged any notable ship sightings in the vicinity of their station, and a detailed record of any unusual or significant occurrences at or near the lighthouse. These meticulously kept logbooks served as vital, official operational records for the lighthouse authorities, allowing them to monitor performance and efficiency. They were also frequently used as primary source documents for maritime safety investigations in the event of shipwrecks, and in some cases, the accumulated weather data even contributed to early meteorological studies and the improvement of navigational charts. The absolute accuracy and unwavering completeness of your logbook entries were of paramount importance. These were not just idle jottings or personal musings designed to pass the long, lonely hours. These bound volumes were regularly collected by the crew of the supply tender during their infrequent visits, or they were carefully inspected on site by stern-faced, exacting officials from the lighthouse service. The information they contained was used for a multitude of official purposes to monitor the overall efficiency, reliability, and cost-effectiveness of the entire lighthouse service, to accurately assess average fuel consumption rates across different types of stations and lamp technologies, and thereby to predict future supply needs with greater precision, and to justify the considerable public expenditures involved in maintaining this vital network of maritime aids. In some instances, particularly from stations with long and consistent records, the accumulated weather data could contribute valuable information to broader meteorological understanding, aiding in the development of early weather forecasting models or assisting in the creation of more accurate and detailed maritime charts that identified prevailing local weather conditions. Dangerous currents, or fog-prone areas, and in the unfortunate but all too common event of a shipwreck occurring in the vicinity of your station, your logbook entries, detailing the prevailing weather at the time, the state of visibility, and, most importantly, the clear and consistent operation of your life-saving light, would be absolutely crucial, often legally admissible, evidence in any subsequent official inquiry or formal investigation into the cause of the disaster. Your carefully written words, your faithfully recorded observations, could serve to completely vindicate your diligence and professionalism in the face of tragedy. Or, conversely, if any neglect, error, or dereliction of duty was found or even suspected from your entries or lack thereof, they could potentially lead to your condemnation, dismissal, and lasting disgrace. Your tools for this vital and exacting task of chronicling your lonely vigil were simple but essential: a good quill pen, which you likely sharpened yourself to a fine, precise point with your trusty pocket knife, or later in the 19th century, perhaps a more modern and convenient steel-nibbed dip pen that offered a more consistent and durable line. You'd have a reliable, well-stoppered pot of dense, indelible black ink, which had to be carefully managed to prevent messy spills in a sometimes swaying, vibrating tower, or from freezing solid in unheated conditions during harsh winter months. There was the logbook itself. Of course, its sturdy pages perhaps already feeling slightly damp and smelling faintly of the pervasive sea air. And then there were your scientific instruments. However basic they might be, the indispensable aneroid or mercurial barometer hanging in its gimbaled case, a trusted thermometer for measuring the air temperature, and perhaps another specifically designed for taking sea temperature readings if you were so equipped and instructed. Maybe your station even boasted a rudimentary anemometer or a simple, reliable wind vane, if provided by the ever-frugal service. But always, your most important and irreplaceable tools for accurate record-keeping were your own sharp, observant, and weather-wise eyes. Your experienced, well-honed judgment, developed through countless years of watching the ever-changing sea and sky, and your unwavering professional commitment to absolute truth and meticulous precision in all your entries. For a quirky tidbit related to these historic records, some surviving 19th century lighthouse logbooks are, in their own quiet and unassuming way, minor works of unintentional art. They often display incredibly beautiful, exceptionally precise, and perfectly legible handwriting, a testament to the keeper's education or his dedication to clarity. Some contain neat, hand-ruled tables, or even carefully drawn little symbols and pictograms to denote different weather conditions, like tiny anchors for good holding ground, or little storm clouds for squalls. Others are more terse, more purely functional, reflecting perhaps a keeper less inclined to any form of literary flourish or artistic embellishment, but no less diligent or accurate in his factual recording of essential data. And the entries made during particularly severe storms or other dramatic events can be especially compelling, even in their typically official and understated brevity. Phrases like mountainous seas breaking over lantern, hurricane force winds shaking tower violently, or lantern glass smashed by large wave, lamp extinguished for 2 hours during repairs, hint powerfully at the immense, terrifying power of the elements that these solitary keepers regularly endured and the bravery they often displayed. The very act of writing in the logbook, of diligently recording these observations and events, was often a quiet, focused, and almost meditative part of your long and structured day. It was a moment for quiet reflection, for imposing a sense of order and routine amidst the often physically demanding, psychologically taxing, and sometimes profoundly chaotic environment of lighthouse life. The rhythmic, gentle scratching of the pen nib on the thick, textured paper would be a small, familiar, and perhaps even comforting sound, sometimes lost entirely in the vast, echoing silence of a perfectly calm day, other times almost completely swallowed by the deafening, terrifying roar of an Atlantic storm raging with full fury just outside your thick stone walls. It was a tangible way to impose a clear, linear structure on a life that could otherwise easily blur into a monotonous, undifferentiated succession of days and nights, a reliable method to mark the steady, relentless, and often lonely passage of time in a remote and isolated place where other external markers of it were often few and far between. While the official logbook was strictly and exclusively for recording objective facts, operational figures, and official observations as mandated by the authorities, some lighthouse keepers, particularly those with a more literary bent, a reflective nature, or perhaps simply a greater need for personal expression and companionship, also chose to maintain private, unofficial diaries or personal journals. Here, in these often hidden, secret volumes, they might allow themselves to record their more personal thoughts, their deepest, unvoiced feelings of profound loneliness, crushing isolation, or sometimes moments of unexpected contentment, spiritual insight, and a deep, almost mystical connection with the raw, untamed nature that surrounded them. They might pen heartfelt poems inspired by the ever-changing moods of the sea, make detailed sketches of the dramatic coastline, the diverse seabirds, or the occasional passing sailing ships. They might document their daily frustrations with the often slow and unresponsive lighthouse service bureaucracy, or express their deep, poignant longing for their families, their sweethearts, and their friends so very far away in the distant, bustling world of men. These precious personal journals, if they survive the ravages of time and eventually come to light for historians, provide incredibly rare, deeply moving, and invaluable insights into the true inner lives, the hidden human struggles, the quiet personal triumphs, and the often complex emotional landscapes of these remarkably resilient and uniquely isolated individuals. The official logbook entry for a particularly bleak Tuesday might state, with stark professional brevity, wind southwest, force 8, sea, very rough, light burning brightly all night, extinguished lamp at official sunrise, polished lens assembly and lantern glass, trimmed wicks, consumed standard daily oil ration, 1-1 unknown bark sighted, bearing southeast very distant, laboring in heavy seas. Odate, the keeper's private, unofficial diary entry for that very same stormy Tuesday, however, might add a rather different, more human layer, wind still howling like 1,000 tormented banshees, trying to tear the very stones from the tower. The whole structure shuddered and groaned all through the endless night. Barely slept a wink. Ate the last stale biscuit with my morning tea. I'm pretty sure that particularly bold and insolent herring gull that perches on the lantern railing every day is actively mocking my very existence. Miss my dear Mary's warm apple pie and her gentle and understanding smile something fierce today? Will this infernal storm ever end? Sometimes you can almost imagine the entries in that official logbook, constrained as they were by regulation and professional decorum, must have felt almost comically understated given the often dramatic or profoundly monotonous reality of the keeper's daily life. Consider a logbook entry for a particularly slow, uneventful Wednesday, wind light and variable. Sea, slight swell. 1-1, distinctly uninteresting and rather common seagull, landed briefly on the lantern railing, looked comprehensively bored with the view, then summarily flew off. Extinguished lamp at official sunrise without any notable incident. Polished entire lens assembly and all lantern glass with usual diligence. Trimmed all wicks to regulation standard. Drank allotted ration of tea. Observed more wind, more sea. Nothing further to report. Honestly, on some of those endlessly similar, event-free days, the absolute, unadulterated highlight, the most thrilling and noteworthy event worthy of careful, precise notation in the official record, was probably the unexpected and brief appearance of a really well-formed and unusually shaped cumulonimbus cloud on the distant western horizon. Riveting edge-of-your-seat stuff for the lighthouse inspectors back in their comfortable, overstuffed city offices. I'm quite sure Sigian. So, with your trusty pen and your pot of indelible ink, you, the steadfast keeper, diligently and faithfully transform the fleeting, ephemeral moments of your long watch, the subtle shifts in the wind's direction, the distant sighting of unknown passing ships, the steady, unwavering burning of your precious lamp through the darkest hours, into a permanent, tangible, and official written record. This meticulously kept logbook was your professional testament, your daily account rendered not just to your earthly superiors in the lighthouse service, but in a way it was also your quiet, humble chronicle offered to history itself, a faithful and enduring record of vigilance kept, of duty done, from a lonely windswept tower standing guard by the vast, restless, and ever-watchful sea. Your meticulous logbook entries for the completed daylight hours are now neatly committed to the official record. The fresh black ink perhaps still drying slowly and carefully on the thick, slightly textured page, a precise handwritten testament to the day's quiet. Methodical diligence and the ever-watchful, analytical IU as the steadfast keeper, consistently keep on the ever-changing, often challenging, natural elements that surround your isolated post. But now, as the afternoon sun, your daytime counterpart in illumination, begins its slow, majestic, and inexorable descent towards the vast, often unseen western horizon, painting the wide sky with fleeting, breathtaking hues of fiery orange, softest pink, and deepening, royal purple. A different kind of anticipation, a familiar sense of focused readiness and grave responsibility, begins to build steadily within you. Keeper, the most critical, the most sacrosanct, the most absolutely non-negotiable ritual of your entire 24-hour cycle. The very core reason for your solitary, dedicated existence in this tall, unyielding stone tower is rapidly and unavoidably approaching the solemn and precise igniting of the great lamp, the deliberate, almost reverent awakening of the powerful, life-saving beam that will once again pierce the gathering darkness of the coming night and offer its unwavering guidance to all those upon the sea. Just as you meticulously observe the precise moment of local sunrise to correctly extinguish the light many hours ago, now your experienced gaze is fixed intently upon the western sky, carefully noting the sun's declining arc, the changing quality of the light, the lengthening of the shadows. Your internal clock, finely tuned and remarkably accurate from months, or perhaps even years, of this unwavering, cyclical routine, tells you with certainty when the crucial time is near. But you also, as a diligent professional, consult your station's official timepiece. If it is reliable, and perhaps the printed astronomical tables supplied by the lighthouse service that specify the exact local sunset time for this particular day of the year at your lighthouse's precise latitude and longitude. The official regulations are, as always, absolute and unambiguous. The lamp must be fully lit and exhibiting its correct, officially designated characteristic, be it fixed, flashing, or occulting, at the very moment the sun finally disappears completely below the distant, dark horizon line. Not a single moment of precious, potentially dangerous, unlit darkness must be left unguarded over the waters your light protects. In the precious, focused hour or so leading up to this critical moment of ignition, you would typically ascend once more those familiar, winding and often very steep stone or iron stairs to the lantern room at the tower's apex. The very atmosphere up here, high above the restless waves, is already subtly changing as the available daylight outside begins to perceptibly wane. There's a sense of hushed, almost sacred expectancy that often fills the circular, glass-enclosed space at this time of day. Your first preparatory task is to carefully, reverently remove the heavy protective linen or canvas curtains, or the fitted wooden shutters from around the magnificent jewel-like Fresnel lens, gently revealing its thousands of gleaming, precisely angled glass facets, which are now poised and ready to receive, concentrate, and powerfully project the light from the soon-to-be-awakened flame. Then, a final expert inspection of the lamp's wicks is absolutely essential. Even though you trim them with painstaking care that very morning after extinguishing the lamp, you check them again with an eagle eye. Are they still perfectly level and even? Is there any hint of accumulated dust from the day, or a stray errant fiber that might cause an imperfect flame? Are they sitting at precisely the correct operational height within the complex burner mechanism to ensure that they will draw the oil evenly and consistently, and produce a perfectly shaped, symmetrical flame? A tiny, almost imperceptible, last-minute adjustment with your special, long-nosed trimming scissors might be necessary to achieve that absolute perfection. This delicate procedure wasn't at all like casually lighting a decorative birthday candle on a cake, where a slightly lopsided, flickering, or even somewhat smoky flame is just charmingly rustic, utterly unimportant and quickly forgotten. Oh no. This particular flame, the one you were about to conjure, had to be an absolute engineering marvel of stability, purity, consistent brightness, and unwavering reliability, for upon its perfect performance rested the safety of human lives. Next, with equal diligence, you double-check the lamp's vital oil supply. Is the lamp's immediate service reservoir, the one that directly feeds the burner, topped up to the precisely correct level for the night's expected burn? Are all the necessary valves in the oil lines open, allowing the fuel to flow freely and correctly to the burner mechanism? Without impediment, you look carefully for any signs of trapped air bubbles in the lines, which could cause sputtering or flame failure, or any potential blockages or constrictions that could impede that vital, steady flow of oil. If yours is a revolving light with a lens that turns to create a flashing pattern, you ensure that the intricate clockwork mechanism is fully wound, freshly lubricated, and standing by, ready to begin its slow, steady, and perfectly timed turning of the massive lens assembly as soon as the lamp itself is burning at its full, designated power. And finally, as a last touch of professional pride, perhaps you give a final, quick, gentle wipe with a soft, dry chamois leather over any easily accessible parts of the great lens or the inner surfaces of the lantern room glass, just to remove any stray dust motes that might have dared to settle since your intensive morning's cleaning session. Every photon counts. It is a mainstream historical fact that the critical procedure of lighting the lighthouse lamp precisely at the moment of local sunset was a paramount daily ritual for all 19th-century lighthouse keepers. A duty that was governed by extremely strict official regulations and often accompanied by a strong sense of personal responsibility. This complex procedure involved a carefully ordered series of meticulous final preparations. These typically included uncovering and inspecting the lens, making any final minute adjustments to the wicks for optimal flame shape, ensuring that the oil supply to the burner was correctly primed and flowing, and verifying that any associated rotational mechanisms for the lens were fully wound and ready for operation. The careful, deliberate ignition of the lamp and the subsequent precise, often lengthy, adjustment of the flame or flames to achieve maximum smoke-free brilliance and ensure that the light's prescribed identifying characteristic, whether it was fixed, flashing, or occulting, was correctly and reliably displayed from the very outset of darkness, were tasks that demanded the keeper's utmost skill, patience, and unwavering attention. Now, the solemn moment has finally arrived. The last fiery sliver of the sun dips dramatically below the distant, dark horizon line, and the sea and sky begin to merge into a deepening twilight. A profound hush might fall, even if you are entirely alone in your towering solitude, a sense of reverence, of profound responsibility, settling upon you like a weighty cloak. With a steady, practiced hand, you take your chosen lighting instrument, perhaps it's a long, slender, waxed taper that you light from a small pilot flame, or a specialized oil-fueled lamplighter with a carefully protected flame at its tip. Or maybe even in the later years of the century, one of those newfangled, slightly sulfurous, but undeniably convenient lucifer matches, though their strong fumes were generally considered less than ideal for use in close proximity to delicate lamp mechanisms and pristine, easily soiled lenses. If you are tending a powerful argand burner with multiple concentric wicks, as was common in larger lighthouses, you would carefully, methodically light each individual wick in the correct, prescribed sequence, ensuring that each one catches properly and begins to draw the oil up from the reservoir. You watch as the initial small, perhaps slightly yellow and somewhat smoky flames gradually begin to grow, to coalesce, to gain strength and stature, and to take on their proper intended form. And here lay the true, almost alchemical art, the signature skill of the experienced and dedicated 19th-century lighthouse keeper. Once all the wicks were successfully lit, the next crucial and often most time-consuming task was to minutely, patiently, and expertly adjust the flame or flames to its absolute peak operational performance. Using the lamp's various finely threaded control knobs, levers, and regulating screws, you would carefully adjust the height of each individual wick, or precisely manage the overall oil flow and the critical draft of air to the burner assembly. You would be striving constantly to achieve the perfect flame shape, the optimal flame height, and the maximum possible intensity of light. The ultimate, unwavering goal was always to produce the most dazzling, penetrating brightness, but without creating even the slightest hint of smoke which would rapidly soot up the precious lens and chimney. Drastically reducing the light's effectiveness and range, and without causing the lamp to burn through its carefully rationed supply of expensive oil too extravagantly or inefficiently. A clean, perfectly steady, intensely brilliant white light was the sought-after ideal, the hallmark of a well-kept lamp. You might even observe the character of the flame through a piece of specially colored inspection glass, perhaps a deep blue or green, which helped you to judge its completeness of combustion and identify any imperfections more easily. You would also listen intently to the sound of the burner, a healthy, powerfully burning and perfectly adjusted lamp often produced a distinctive, gentle, and steady roar or a contented, reassuring hiss. A sound that was undoubtedly pure music to a dedicated lighthouse keeper's well-attuned ears. For a quirky tidbit, some particularly meticulous, or perhaps even slightly superstitious. Lighthouse keepers were known to have developed their own unwritten, intensely personal, almost ritualistic little routines and habits that they performed just before the solemn, highly significant act of lighting the main lamp each and every evening. This might involve something as simple as a silent, personal prayer for a safe night for all those at sea, or a particular, unchanging sequence for checking the various components of the lamp mechanism, or even a specific, unvarying way of holding the lighting taper as they brought it to the wicks. These deeply ingrained individual rituals, though never mentioned in the official manuals, likely helped them to focus their minds completely on the critical task at hand, to manage the immense psychological pressure of their life-saving responsibility, and perhaps to imbue this vital daily act with a sense of personal significance, solemnity, and even sacred reverence. And there is no doubt that the first majestic, sweeping flash of a newly lit revolving light, as it began its slow, inexorable, and perfectly timed arc across the rapidly darkening sea and the shadowy landscape, was often a profoundly reassuring and deeply satisfying sight, not only to any anxious mariners out on the water who might be desperately watching for it, but also to the keeper himself. A clear, luminous, and tangible sign that all was indeed well within his domain, that his meticulous preparations had once again been successful, and that his long, lonely night watch had truly and officially begun. Slowly, steadily, under your expert, patient, and unwavering hand, the great lamp finally achieves its full dazzling and designed brilliance. The lantern room, which just a short while ago was filled with the soft, fading, ambiguous hues of twilight, now positively blazes with an intense, pure, and unwavering white glow. If it's a revolving light, the massive multi-ton lens assembly, with the now powerfully burning lamp precisely positioned at its exact focal point, begins its slow, majestic, and perfectly timed rotation, sending that powerful, life-saving characteristic beam sweeping out methodically across the darkening sea, a visible, rhythmic promise of guidance, hope, and safety to all who might see it. Now, the exact level of individual discretion and on-the-spot expert judgment that 19th-century lighthouse keepers were officially permitted by their governing authorities, or perhaps more realistically, were unofficially expected through accumulated experience to exercise in finely adjusting their lamp flames for optimal peak performance under widely varying and often rapidly changing atmospheric conditions, such as significant fluctuations in ambient humidity, dramatic shifts in air temperature which could notably affect oil viscosity and its flow to the burner, or even changes in barometric pressure which might influence combustion, versus the strict extent to which they were rigidly mandated by their official operational manuals to adhere to preset mechanical calibrations or fixed, unchangeable wick height settings, is an area where the formal, often idealized written record and the practical, hands-on, and often challenging realities of nightly lamp operation may have sometimes significantly diverged. Experienced keepers undoubtedly developed a profound feel for their specific, often temperamental apparatus that went far beyond any written instructions. They learned to read their light, and with that critical act of ignition successfully accomplished, your most crucial task is now done, at least for this particular pivotal moment. The life-saving light is alive and burning true. Your long night watch has well and truly begun. You might now make the first precise entry in your official logbook for the new night, lamp lit precisely at official sunset, exhibiting full power and correct characteristic, all in good order. Then, perhaps it's time for a brief, quiet, solitary celebration of another duty faithfully commenced. All right, you might think with a sigh of weary satisfaction. Lamp successfully lit. The maritime world is thereby saved from immediate and certain peril for now. At least, and in this small patch of ocean, time for a truly celebratory cup of, well, probably, let's be honest, more of that rather lukewarm and slightly bitter tea we discussed earlier. And perhaps, if you're feeling particularly decadent and reckless tonight, a slightly stale but nonetheless exceedingly welcome biscuit. The unending, unadulterated glamour of dedicated lighthouse keeping. Folks, it truly never ever ceases to amaze. Each lighthouse lamp, you can well imagine, probably developed its own unique, almost human-like personality in the keeper's eyes after many months or long years of close, intimate, and solitary association. Old Bess here. You might find yourself murmuring quietly to the massive, glowing lamp as it hums softly beside you. She's a bit grumpy and undeniably temperamental on particularly damp or windy evenings, often needs a bit of gentle sweet-talking and some very precise, patient adjustment to get her flame burning just right and perfectly smoke-free. But once she's properly going, once she's settled into her nightly rhythm, she's an absolute star, a true, unwavering beacon. You'd almost certainly start talking to your lamp, and perhaps to the seagulls, and maybe even to the waves themselves, after a few long, silent months alone in that tower. The tower is now a brilliant beacon, a radiant, unwavering point of bright reference in the vast, encroaching, and often featureless blackness of the night. As the keeper, you have once again successfully and faithfully fulfilled that ancient, almost sacred duty passed down through generations of your kind. You have brought forth light into the darkness. You have offered hope and guidance to the distant, unseen traveler upon the waters. And you have begun another vigilant, solitary watch over the dark, uncertain, and ever-restless sea. The long night ahead will be demanding, but for now, the precious flame burns true and strong. The great lamp in its lofty glass house now blazes at its full, designed glory. Its powerful, meticulously focused beam, slicing with reassuring rhythmic precision through the deepening, encompassing twilight. It has become a steadfast, unwavering promise of guidance and safety against the vast, dark, and often treacherous canvas of the night sea. Your most crucial and symbolic act of the evening, the careful, reverent ignition and perfect, painstaking adjustment of the life-giving light, is now successfully complete. Keeper, but your vital work, your solemn, lonely, and unceasing vigil, is far, far from over. Indeed, in many ways, as true darkness finally descends and cloaks the world outside your isolated tower, your most demanding responsibilities have only just truly begun. Now commences the long watch, those many solitary, often silent, and intensely focused hours spent in the close, warm, and sometimes almost hypnotic company of the constantly burning light, dedicated with every fiber of your being to ensuring its unwavering fidelity, its maximum brilliance, and its life-saving visibility until the sun itself once more reclaims the sky from the retreating, exhausted shadows of the night. The fundamental rhythm of your night in a 19th-century lighthouse was dictated by the established watch schedule. If you were fortunate enough to be stationed at a larger, more important, and perhaps less isolated lighthouse, one that was perhaps staffed by 2 or even 3 keepers, the long expanse of the night, from sunset to sunrise, would be formally divided into watches. These were typically 4 hours on active duty, followed by 8 hours off for rest and sleep, a system designed, at least in theory, to ensure that there was always an alert, rested, and fully competent keeper responsible for the continuous operation of the light. The handing over of the watch from one keeper to another would be a formal, if usually brief, procedure involving a verbal report on the lamp's current performance, any changes in the prevailing weather conditions, any notable observations made during the preceding watch, and a formal acknowledgement that the responsibility for the light had been transferred. But if yours was one of the many smaller, more remote stations, or if you were a sole keeper, as many lighthouse pioneers were, particularly on those incredibly isolated and often perilous rock lighthouses far out at sea, then the entire night, Every single minute from the last ray of sunset to the first hint of dawn was your undivided, solitary responsibility. The sheer physical and mental endurance required for such an unremitting task was immense, demanding a will of iron, an almost superhuman ability to resist the insidious, creeping siren call of sleep, and a profound, deeply ingrained sense of duty. Brief, snatched catnaps, perhaps taken uncomfortably in a sturdy chair in the lantern room itself, or on a narrow bunk in a nearby watchroom, might be possible during periods of exceptionally calm weather, but only if the lamp was burning with perfect, unwavering steadiness. True, deep, restorative sleep was a precious luxury rarely afforded and keenly missed until daylight finally brought relief. Your primary, overriding, and all-consuming focus throughout these long, dark, and often eerily silent hours was, of course, the great lamp itself. It was your sacred charge, your demanding, sometimes temperamental child, your brilliant, fiery, and only constant companion through the lonely night. At regular, prescribed intervals, perhaps every hour on the hour, or even more frequently if weather conditions were particularly challenging. If the lamp was known to be a bit finicky, or if your experienced senses detected the slightest, almost imperceptible irregularity in its performance, you would meticulously inspect the flame. Was it still burning at its optimal height and with its maximum designed brightness? Was its characteristic shape perfectly symmetrical and absolutely steady? Or was it beginning to flicker or waver? Were there any telltale signs of smoking, any almost invisible wisps of oily soot beginning to form that might soon dim its precious output, or, worse, foul the meticulously cleaned lens? Was the color of the flame still a pure, brilliant, incandescent white? Or was it perhaps taking on a slightly yellowish, less efficient, and more wasteful hue? Even subtle changes in the ambient conditions, such as the oil level within the lamp's service tank gradually dropping as it was consumed throughout the long night, or significant fluctuations in the air temperature or humidity within the lantern room itself, could affect the delicate balance of combustion and necessitate skillful, and immediate adjustments. You might need to use the lamp's fine controls to make tiny changes to the height of the wicks, or to slightly alter the flow of oil to the burner, or adjust the draft of air that fed the flame, all to maintain that perfect, unwavering, life-saving burn. It was rather like being a very, very patient, highly skilled, and incredibly responsible celestial DJ, constantly, almost instinctively, fine-tuning the levels and the mix, not for the perfect dance beat to keep a party going, but for the perfect, life-saving, far-reaching beam of light to keep ships from perishing. One wrong or neglected tweak, one moment of inattention, and the entire vital party could be over. Quite literally and tragically, for some poor, unsuspecting ship navigating blindly out there in the unforgiving darkness. It is a mainstream historical fact that the demanding night watches for 19th-century lighthouse keepers were characterized by the absolute necessity for constant, unwavering vigilance, primarily focused on ensuring the uninterrupted and optimal performance of the station's main navigational lamp. Keepers were strictly required by their service regulations to regularly and meticulously monitor the lamp's flame throughout the entire duration of the night. This involved making precise, often tiny, adjustments to the wicks and the fuel flow as frequently as necessary to maintain maximum brightness, prevent any smoking or flickering that would reduce visibility, and ensure that the light consistently exhibited its correct, officially designated identifying characteristic, whether it was a fixed light or one with a specific flashing or occulting pattern, without any failure or deviation until the moment of sunrise. Even the expansive glass panes of the lantern room itself required your regular attention throughout the night. On cold, damp nights, condensation could quickly form on the inside surfaces of the numerous panes, potentially obscuring the light and scattering its beam. You'd need to regularly and carefully wipe this moisture away with a clean, dry cloth. In harsh winter conditions, frost or even, in extreme cases, layers of ice could build up on the exterior surfaces of the lantern glass, posing a very serious problem that demanded immediate and sometimes quite perilous efforts to clear it. This might involve using specially designed long-handled scrapers or brushes, or applying warm cloths if accessible from the outer gallery, all while battling freezing winds and treacherous, icy footing. And if your lighthouse was one that featured a revolving lens to create its unique flashing signature, you'd be constantly, almost subconsciously, listening to the steady, rhythmic tick-tock or gentle, continuous whir of the massive clockwork mechanism that tirelessly turned the heavy optics. Any unexpected change in that familiar, mechanical sound, a new, ominous click, a worrying, grating groan, or a subtle, almost imperceptible alteration in its established rhythm, could signal an impending problem with the gears, the weights, or the lubrication. A problem that would require your immediate, expert investigation and, if at all possible, your skilled intervention, even in the dead of night. Some older, less efficient, or particularly large clockwork mechanisms might even require the truly arduous task of rewinding their massive weights, once or perhaps even twice during the course of a single long night. Another physically demanding and unwelcome interruption to your solitary vigil, performed in the lonely, echoing wee hours, deep within the unlit core of the tower. Your vigilant eyes weren't just fixed on the lamp and its immediate surroundings. They were also constantly scanning the surrounding sea and the ever-changing sky. You were, in effect, the tower's primary, on-duty meteorologist throughout the night, always watching for any significant changes in the weather. Was that distant, ominous haze on the horizon thickening into a genuine, disorienting fog bank? One that might soon roll in and completely swallow your precious light? Rendering it useless to those at sea was the wind direction noticeably shifting. Or was its strength and pitch discernibly picking up, perhaps heralding the swift and unwelcome approach of a dangerous, unpredicted storm? You'd likely consult your station's barometer regularly throughout the night, its slowly or rapidly falling needle often providing the first crucial, scientific warning of deteriorating atmospheric conditions. And you had to be constantly prepared, both mentally and physically, to swiftly and efficiently activate the station's powerful fog signal. Be it a booming bell that needed to be rung with strenuous effort, a deafening steam-powered horn that required stoking a boiler, or a thundering compressed air cannon that needed to be loaded and fired at precise intervals. If visibility dropped below a certain critical, predetermined point, that often subjective and highly consequential decision, when exactly to start the fog signal and for how long to keep it operating, rested solely on your experienced, professional judgment. And it was a decision that could also directly mean life or death for unseen, unheard mariners feeling their way blindly through the impenetrable murk. While your primary all-consuming duty was unquestionably the steadfast and flawless maintenance of your own light, 19th-century lighthouse keepers were also, by their very nature, their isolated location, and their official instructions, considered crucial watchmen for the sea itself. Throughout your long, dark watch, you would be periodically scanning the dark waters within your light's visible reach, not just for routine shipping traffic, but also for any signs of vessels that might be sailing too close to known offshore dangers, reefs, shoals, sandbanks. Despite your guiding beam, perhaps they had misjudged their course, were suffering from equipment failure, or were being driven off course by strong currents or winds. And most grimly and urgently, you were always vigilant for any unmistakable signs of ships in actual, immediate distress, the sudden, desperate orange-red bloom of a distress flare arcing tragically across the black sky, the distant, urgent, white flash of signal rockets being fired, the faint, muffled, percussive report of signal guns being repeatedly discharged, or the deeply unsettling sight of a ship displaying unusual, erratic lights or making strange, uncontrolled movements that indicated it was no longer under command. The heavy, immediate responsibility of what to do if such a distress signal was seen, how to best raise an alarm, if at all possible from your isolated station, or how to prepare for any potential rescue efforts, however limited your own station's means might be, was a constant, sobering, an emotionally draining undercurrent to your solitary nightly vigil. For a quirky tidbit about enduring these long nights, some particularly dedicated or perhaps just creatively inclined. Lighthouse keepers reportedly developed quite elaborate and highly personal routines or specific comforts to help them pass the seemingly endless, often profoundly monotonous hours of the night watch and, most importantly, to maintain their essential alertness against the insidious creep of sleep. This might include methodically reciting long passages of memorized poetry or scripture from memory, quietly singing old sea shanties, folk songs, or hymns to themselves to break the oppressive silence. Some engaged in small, easily portable, and repetitive crafts like intricate model shipbuilding within tiny bottles, the patient tying of complex nautical knots, or the slow, methodical making or mending of fishing nets. Others, in moments of extreme quiet and stillness, might find themselves methodically counting the rhythmic, hypnotic rotations of the great lens as it swept its beam around, or even attempting to count the crashing of the waves against the tower's unyielding base. Anything at all to keep the mind active, focused, engaged, and resistant to the overwhelming seductive call of drowsiness in the deep, profound, and often echoing silence of the isolated night. And then, of course, there was always the ever-present, deeply personal, and often exhausting internal battle against overwhelming drowsiness and the profound, sometimes almost crushing, weight of utter solitude. How did you manage to stay awake, keeper, through those endless, silent, inky black hours, especially when the weather was deceptively calm and the great lamp was burning with a hypnotic, unwavering steadiness that offered no immediate cause for concern? Perhaps you relied on small, carefully rationed amounts of strong, black coffee or bracing tea. If your precious supplies allowed for such a luxury throughout the entire night, perhaps the sheer, biting cold of the lantern room on a harsh winter's night, a cold that seeped into your very bones, helped to keep you uncomfortably alert. Perhaps it was the ingrained habit of regularly, restlessly pacing the narrow confines of the lantern gallery, the cold iron grating vibrating slightly under your worn leather boots, the raw wind tugging fiercely at your oilskins. But mostly, one suspects it was the immense, unshakable, and ever-present weight of your profound responsibility, the constant nagging awareness that so many unknown lives, so many unseen fortunes, depended entirely on your unwavering wakefulness and diligence. Your only true companions through many of these long, dark nights were often just the sighing or roaring wind, the endless, powerful rhythm of the breaking waves, the steady, reassuring hum of your perfectly trimmed lamp, and occasionally, perhaps, a very confused, unfortunate, and doomed moth desperately, fatally, bumping its tiny, fragile body against the hot, impenetrable lantern glass, irresistibly, tragically drawn to its brilliant, deadly, artificial sun. It certainly makes your average modern office job, even with its most annoying colleagues, its endless, pointless meetings, and its flickering fluorescent lights, seem like a bustling, vibrant, and wonderfully distracting social club by sheer comparison. Now, the true frequency, the precise nature, and the psychological interpretation of reported hallucinations, phantom ships, ghostly voices, or other unusual sensory or visionary experiences that were occasionally described in the journals or later reminiscences of some highly isolated 19th century lighthouse keepers during their long, solitary night watches, and whether these often unsettling experiences were genuine psychological phenomena induced by factors such as profound and chronic sleep deprivation, extreme sensory monotony, the disorienting effects of prolonged isolation, or perhaps even the subtle influence of carbon monoxide from imperfectly burning lamps in poorly ventilated spaces, or whether they were simply embellished tales recounted later for dramatic effect and public consumption, or perhaps even, in some less common cases, actual misinterpretations of complex but entirely natural phenomena like St. Elmo's fire, unusual forms of bioluminescence in the sea, or peculiar atmospheric optical conditions caused by fog or ice crystals, remains a fascinating, somewhat mysterious, and often elusive topic. It continues to intrigue and be debated by psychologists specializing in sensory deprivation, maritime folklorists collecting tales of the sea, and social historians attempting to understand the full spectrum of the human experience within these extreme environments. The line between reality and illusion could sometimes blur in the deep solitude of the night. The original, most potent, and utterly reliable energy drink for any 19th century lighthouse keeper. One strongly imagines that was simply sheer, unadulterated, ice-cold terror. The chilling, ever-present thought of your precious, life-saving light unexpectedly failing in the middle of a dark and stormy night, and the absolutely horrifying possibility that such a failure on your part could directly, culpably cause a catastrophic shipwreck with a terrible loss of life, was probably far more effective at keeping you wide awake, sharply alert, and meticulously attentive at 3 a.m. than even a triple-strength espresso, a modern can of sugary, chemically laced caffeinated fizz, or a stern lecture from the lighthouse inspector himself. So, the long night watch unfolds, hour by solitary, watchful hour, each rhythmic tick of the mighty clockwork mechanism, each majestic sweep of the brilliant beam across the dark waters, each mournful sigh of the wind around the lonely tower is a constant, poignant reminder of your isolated yet utterly vital post. You are the unsleeping eye in the heart of the storm, the steadfast, reliable human presence standing firm against the vast, uncaring, and often violent indifference of the night sea. Your unwavering vigilance, your quiet dedication, is the thin, bright, unwavering line that separates safety from disaster for all those unknown souls who depend entirely on the faithful light you so tirelessly and conscientiously keep. Your long, solitary night watch, steadfast keeper, is often a quiet, rhythmic, and predictable battle against the ever-encroaching fingers of comfortable monotony and the seductive, almost irresistible whispers of sleep. It's typically a well-established routine of meticulous checks on the lamp, patient adjustments to the wicks and oil flow, and unwavering vigilance, all played out against the gentle and reassuring hum of a perfectly burning flame and the distant, soothing sigh or rhythmic murmur of a relatively peaceful and cooperative sea. But then, keeper. Then there are the other nights. The nights that every lighthouse keeper, however experienced or stoic, secretly or openly dreaded, the nights when the ancient, slumbering, and almost unimaginable fury of the ocean awakens in its full, terrifying, and utterly untamed glory. The nights when your lonely, isolated tower, your steadfast and usually unyielding beacon of hope and safety, becomes a heavily besieged stone fortress, and your precious, fragile, man-made light is the only slender and desperately maintained shield against the overwhelming, elemental chaos of a major, raging tempest. You would have seen the ominous signs, of course, hours, perhaps even a full day, in advance. Your experienced, weather-wise eyes, constantly scanning the horizon and the sky, and the faithful, often nervously consulted, needle of your station's barometer would have warned you of its inexorable approach. The sky would first turn a bruised, unsettling, almost bruised purple-black. The wind would begin to moan with a new, more menacing note, and then gradually, ominously, build to a piercing, banshee-like shriek. The sea itself, your constant companion, would transform from a familiar, undulating surface into a heaving, confused, and angrily churning mass of monstrous, white-crested, relentlessly charging waves. And then, as the storm finally hits your exposed station with its full, brutal, and unpitying force, your entire perceived world shrinks dramatically to the precarious, vibrating confines of the besieged tower. The sound alone is deafening, overwhelming, a continuous, almost unbearable and primeval roar of wind and water. a chaotic symphony of nature's rage. This terrifying orchestra is punctuated by the sickening, cannon-like impact of colossal, rogue waves, each weighing many hundreds of tons, crashing with unimaginable violence against the solid stonework or iron legs of your tower. These impacts send deep, bone-jarring tremors up through the very foundations, making the entire massive structure shudder, groan, and sometimes even perceptibly sway as if in its death agony. It's rather like being trapped inside a very large, very old, and increasingly distressed industrial washing machine. One that has been mistakenly and terrifyingly set to the Apocalypse Now cycle, with a complementary unwelcome side order of profound, gut-wrenching existential dread. Through all this terrifying chaos, your primary, all-consuming, and almost sacred duty remains utterly unchanged. Yet it becomes infinitely more difficult, more perilous, and more mentally taxing the light. Your precious light must stay lit at all costs. The wind, now a screaming, invisible demon, can find its way through the smallest, previously unnoticed crack or ventilator shaft in the lantern room. It can threaten to extinguish the vital flame with a sudden, violent gust, or, at the very least, make it burn erratically, sending clouds of oily smoke upwards to rapidly obscure the meticulously cleaned lens. The violent vibrations from the tower constantly shaking can upset the delicate balance of the complex lamp mechanism, or disrupt the steady, even flow of oil to the burner. Salt spray, and sometimes even sheets of solid green water from particularly massive breaking waves, can smash with terrifying force against the thick, specially designed lantern glass, momentarily obscuring the light, or worse, threatening to fracture or even completely break the panes, exposing your precious flame to the full fury of the storm. You find yourself constantly, anxiously adjusting the lamp, shielding it as best you can, coaxing it, protecting that vital flame with every ounce of your skill and determination, your own heart often pounding in anxious, stressful unison with the storm's wild, unpredictable, and deafening rhythm. Every potential vulnerability of the tower must be secured. Any storm shutters on lower windows, the heavy main door at the tower's base, any access hatches all must be doubly checked and securely fastened against the onslaught. Throughout the storm, you'd be constantly, anxiously checking for leaks, for any signs of the angry sea forcing its unwelcome way into the lower levels of your precarious home. Or worse, into the lantern room itself, where it could damage the delicate optics or the lamp. During a really bad, prolonged storm, with mountainous waves breaking clean over the entire structure, one imagines the official lighthouse instruction manual, that book of all wisdom, probably just had a very short, very pragmatic, and not entirely reassuring section for such extreme circumstances. Step 1. Ensure your personal affairs are in good order, and perhaps make a brief, heartfelt peace with your maker. Step 2. Trying against all reasonable expectation and considerable physical evidence to the contrary, not to let the life-saving light go out. Step 3. We, the Lighthouse Board, sincerely wish you the very best of British or American, or French luck. Terse, perhaps, but undoubtedly to the point when facing the raw, untamed power of a full-blown oceanic tempest. It is a mainstream historical fact that lighthouse keepers throughout the 19th century, particularly those individuals stationed on perilously exposed rock lighthouses far out at sea or on remote, storm-battered coastal headlands, frequently and heroically endured terrifying and often prolonged storms where massive, powerful waves could break completely over the entire height of their tower. During these terrifying tempests, their paramount, overriding, and incredibly challenging duty was to keep the vital navigational light burning brightly and reliably at all costs. This was a task made extraordinarily difficult and dangerous by the violent, unpredictable conditions, with the tower itself often vibrating violently and at constant risk of suffering significant structural damage or extensive flooding. They also had to be constantly prepared for the lamp mechanism itself, however robust, to malfunction or fail completely under such extreme duress. Perhaps the lighthouse keeper's greatest, most terrifying fear during such a violent tempest was the sudden, catastrophic failure of the light itself. The precious lamp might sputter and die due to water unexpectedly ingressing into the lantern, a sudden disruption in the oil supply caused by the tower's violent motion, or a mechanical failure of the burner. The intricate, delicate clockwork mechanism that diligently rotated a flashing lens could jam solid, or one of its vital components could break under the relentless, jarring vibrations of the besieged tower. In such a dire, almost unthinkable emergency, you would be working with frantic, desperate, and adrenaline-fueled urgency, often in the roaring, pitching darkness of the storm-tossed lantern room, perhaps by the dim, flickering, and unreliable light of a small, hastily lit hand lantern. You'd be trying to diagnose the critical problem and somehow effect a life-or-death repair. Your fingers often numb with cold and fumbling, your body perhaps bruised and aching from being thrown about by the tower's violent movements. Every single minute that the main light was out exponentially increased the terrible danger for any unfortunate ship that might be caught out in the same storm, desperately seeking your guiding beam. Most lighthouses were equipped with a smaller, simpler auxiliary or emergency lamp, perhaps a fixed dioptric apparatus with a less powerful but more robust burner, which could be lit if the main one failed catastrophically. But actually getting this backup system safely lit, properly positioned, and functioning effectively in the chaotic midst of a hurricane-force storm, with freezing water perhaps pouring into the lantern room through a broken pane, was an act of true heroism, demanding immense courage, skill, and presence of mind. And then there was the almost unbearable, soul-crushing agony of actually witnessing a shipwreck, often unfolding with horrifying slowness or devastating speed right before your helpless eyes. From your high, wind-lashed vantage point in the lantern room, even through the driving, opaque curtains of rain and the stinging clouds of sea spray, you might clearly see a doomed ship, perhaps dismasted by the wind, its steering gear broken, utterly helpless and out of control, being relentlessly, inexorably driven by the mountainous waves towards the very same treacherous rocks, hidden reefs, or deadly shoals that your light, now perhaps tragically obscured by the storm's own fury, was meant to warn it away from. Or you might see the desperate, fleeting lights of a vessel in distress suddenly, sickeningly vanish into the raging, tumultuous blackness of the sea, the overwhelming feeling of utter impotence, especially for a keeper on an isolated rock tower with absolutely no means of direct physical intervention or communication, must have been a truly crushing, spirit-breaking burden to bear. Your official instructions would be to try and warn them if they were seen to be standing into obvious and immediate danger before disaster struck, perhaps by repeatedly firing the station's dedicated warning cannon. If your lighthouse was equipped with one, and if you could even reach it safely, or by making other urgent, desperate signals if there was even the faintest chance they could be seen or heard above the deafening roar of the storm. But often, tragically, it was already far too late. The emotional toll on those lighthouse keepers who witnessed such horrific maritime tragedies, who sometimes heard the faint, desperate cries of drowning sailors carried on the pitiless wind, was immense, often unspoken, and undoubtedly left deep, lasting scars on their souls. For a quirky, though grim, tidbit, there are several well-documented, almost legendary and truly terrifying accounts from the 19th century of lighthouse keepers, and sometimes their entire families if they were stationed with them on particularly vulnerable towers, having to retreat in desperation to the very uppermost levels of their stone or iron structures for many days, or even for several weeks on end. They would be living on rapidly dwindling emergency rations after the lower sections of their lighthouse had been completely flooded, violently smashed apart, or rendered entirely uninhabitable by exceptionally violent, record-breaking storms that sent colossal waves crashing clean over the entire structure, sometimes even damaging the lantern itself. The lighthouse, their supposed fortress of safety, would temporarily become a tiny, fragile, besieged island, a last refuge within a raging, terrifyingly angry, and seemingly endless sea, The resilience and courage of those who endured such ordeals is almost beyond comprehension. If your lighthouse was fortunately land-based, or if by some incredible miracle of fate or seamanship, survivors from a nearby wreck managed to make it through the deadly surf and ashore near your station, your role would instantly and dramatically shift. You might be the very first person to raise the alarm, perhaps by telegraph if your station was connected, or by sending up signal rockets if you had them, to alert local lifeboat crews if any existed in the vicinity and could possibly launch in such conditions or the inhabitants of nearby fishing villages along the coast. You would, of course, be expected to provide whatever immediate succor and comfort you possibly could to any survivors who reached your light. Shelter from the continuing storm, warm blankets, hot drinks if you could manage to keep a fire going, and basic first aid for their injuries. Sometimes this involved considerable personal risk, such as scrambling down treacherous, slippery cliff paths in the pitch darkness and howling wind to try and pull exhausted, half-drowned sailors from the deadly, pounding surf. And often, but unfortunately, it also involved the grim, heartbreaking, and physically exhausting task of recovering the bodies of those who did not survive the wreck, and carefully, respectfully logging their descriptions or any identifying marks for the later sorrowful process of official identification by the authorities or grieving relatives. Now, the precise psychological toll and the potential for long-term mental health consequences that stemmed from frequently witnessing shipwrecks, human suffering, and often large-scale death at sea, particularly for those lighthouse keepers stationed for prolonged periods on exceptionally isolated rock stations where they were, by necessity, almost always helpless observers of maritime tragedies rather than active participants in rescue efforts. And furthermore, how these solitary individuals emotionally and mentally coped with such potentially deeply traumatic experiences in an era that had little to no formal understanding of concepts like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or dedicated occupational stress support, is a deeply poignant, largely unquantifiable, and exceptionally challenging area of ongoing maritime social history research. Historians must often attempt to infer such profound impacts from the sparse, stoic, and professionally restrained entries in official lighthouse logs, the occasional surviving personal letter or diary, or the later, sometimes unreliable, family reminiscences and local legends. The true depth of their silent suffering is hard to gauge, so just try to imagine the sheer intensity of that scene for a fleeting moment. As you lie there warm and safe, you're desperately attempting to keep a very large, very important, and often quite temperamental oil lamp burning with perfect, unwavering brightness, providing its life-saving beam to any unseen ships that might be out there. Simultaneously, the entire massive stone tower around you is vibrating and shaking like a badly made nervous jelly in the middle of a violent earthquake. Colossal, green water waves, each weighing many, many tons, are repeatedly, thunderously attempting to forcibly redecorate your small living room with large quantities of smelly seaweed, unfortunate crabs, and perhaps even parts of the surrounding cliff face. And to top it all off with a cherry of pure terror, there's very likely a distressed, unseen ship out there somewhere in the howling, impenetrable darkness, quite possibly playing a deadly, final game of pinball with the treacherous nearby reefs that your light is supposed to reveal. It was, you might say with considerable, almost comical understatement, just another typically busy and rather stressful Tuesday night for a dedicated, underpaid, and perpetually underslept 19th century wiki during a major winter storm. The tempest's unrelenting fury tested not only the physical strength of the stone and iron that formed your tower, but it also, and perhaps even more profoundly, tested the very fiber of your being. Keeper. To keep that precious light burning steadfastly through the raging maelstrom, to witness firsthand the awesome, terrifying, destructive power of the untamed sea, and sometimes, tragically, to observe the heartbreaking fate of those unfortunate souls caught helplessly within its deadly, indifferent embrace, required a unique combination of unwavering courage, exceptional resilience, deep-seated technical skill, and a profound, almost spiritual sense of unwavering duty that is, from our modern perspective of relative safety and instant communication, almost beyond our full comprehension. These were the nights that undoubtedly seared themselves into the memory and soul. Long, dark, terrifying nights of heroic, often entirely solitary, struggle against the overwhelming, uncaring, and utterly indifferent rage of the primal elements. The terrifying, all-consuming fury of the tempest has, for now, perhaps finally subsided, leaving behind a strangely calm, eerily quiet, and wave-washed world. Your sturdy tower, a testament to its own robust resilience and to your unwavering courage through the storm, still stands, battered perhaps, but unbowed. Or maybe, more typically, it was simply another long, uneventful, and deeply silent night of steady, unwavering vigilance. The great lamp burning brightly and without fault, its reassuring beam sweeping rhythmically and methodically across a placid, starlit sea, the life-saving light, your primary, all-consuming charge, either continues its nightly duty under the watchful eye of another keeper, if you are so fortunate as to have a colleague sharing your station, or it has just been dutifully, precisely extinguished by your own hand at the exact moment of sunrise. Its magnificent glass lens has been meticulously cleaned until it sparkles. Its intricate mechanisms have been tended to with expert care. Now, in those precious, often all too brief hours when you are not actively, directly engaged in the demanding tasks of tending the flame, battling the relentless, often hostile elements, or performing essential structural maintenance on your stone or iron cylinder, what then, keeper? How did you possibly fill the quiet, sometimes achingly vast and empty, stretches of unstructured time in your profoundly isolated world? Surrounded as you were only by the endless expanse of the sea and the overarching, ever-changing sky, how did you find solace, intellectual stimulation, or simply a practical, engaging way to keep the insidious, encroaching tendrils of profound loneliness and potentially soul-crushing monotony safely at bay? It's important for us to remember, as we settle into our own comfortable beds tonight, that for a 19th-century lighthouse keeper, especially one stationed entirely alone on a remote rock or a distant, uninhabited island, the very concept of off-duty was always a rather relative, almost nebulous term. The lighthouse and its vital, life-saving light were a constant, round-the-clock, inescapable responsibility. Even when you were not formally on watch in the lantern room, a significant part of your mind, your subconscious, was always alert, always listening intently for any unexpected change in the weather. Any unusual sound from the complex lamp machinery or the revolving clockwork, always held in a state of readiness to spring into immediate action should an emergency arise. True, deep, entirely carefree leisure, the kind where you can completely switch off from your work, was an exceptionally rare and incredibly precious commodity in your world. Yet, when those quieter, less demanding interludes in your rigorous daily and nightly schedule did arrive, reading was perhaps the most common, the most cherished, and often the most transformative solace for those keepers who were literate and fortunate enough to have access to a supply of books. In the profound, almost tangible silence of the isolated tower, broken only by the elemental sounds of the wind and the waves, a well-chosen book could be a magical portal to other worlds, a stimulating companion offering silent conversation, a patient teacher imparting new knowledge or old wisdom. The Holy Bible was an almost universal fixture in even the smallest, most rudimentary lighthouse libraries, its familiar verses offering spiritual comfort, moral guidance, and a deep sense of connection to a wider faith community. Beyond that, any available reading material could be wonderfully varied, if often limited. Practical manuals on lighthouse keeping itself, on navigation, basic engineering, meteorology, or first aid were common and frequently studied with professional diligence. Perhaps there might be a few well-worn classics of literature or volumes of poetry, a history of the realm, or collections of philosophical essays, all treasured and reread many times over. And of course, newspapers and magazines, brought by the infrequent but eagerly awaited supply tender, and thus often many weeks or even several months out of date by the time they reached your isolated hands, were devoured with an intensity and attention to every single line of print that we in our modern age of constant, overwhelming, and often trivial instant information overload can scarcely begin to imagine. A 3-month-old newspaper detailing long past political squabbles in the distant capital, or, heaven forbid, outlining already outdated changes in ladies' skirt fashions, was basically considered breaking news, hot off the press, and a source of intense discussion if you had a fellow keeper to share it with. Good heavens! You might exclaim to your only readily available companion, a rather indifferent and probably unimpressed seagull perched on the lantern railing. Can you believe it? Crinoline skirts are still all the rage in London. Astounding truly, the world beyond this rock moves at a bewildering and quite unpredictable pace. Writing, too, occupied many keepers during their quieter hours. There were, of course, the official logbooks and detailed reports that we've already discussed, demanding meticulous accuracy and clarity. But beyond those formal duties, many keepers penned long, often heartfelt, and sometimes surprisingly eloquent letters to their families, their sweethearts, and their friends far away, pouring out their daily observations of the sea and sky, their private feelings, their hopes, their fears, and their deep, aching longing for human connection. These letters, carefully sealed and entrusted to the next visit of the supply tender, were their fragile, precious bridges to the familiar world they had temporarily left behind. Some keepers, particularly those with a more reflective or literary inclination, also kept detailed personal journals or private diaries. These were secret, unofficial spaces where they could record their innermost thoughts without fear of official scrutiny, document their ongoing struggles with the profound solitude of their station, articulate their philosophical musings inspired by the vastness and power of the ocean, or simply note down the small, significant details of their unique, isolated, and often strangely beautiful existence. And occasionally, a keeper with a true poetic soul might even try their hand at composing original verses, melancholic songs, or short, evocative stories. Their creativity perhaps sparked and fueled by the dramatic, ever-changing beauty and the stark, inspiring loneliness of their extraordinary surroundings. It is a mainstream historical fact that in their limited off-duty hours, 19th-century lighthouse keepers typically and resourcefully engaged in a wide variety of solitary or, if stationed with others, small group pastimes. These activities were specifically designed and consciously undertaken to combat the ever-present threat of profound loneliness, the insidious creep of mental stagnation, and the inherent soul-draining monotony of their highly isolated and rigorously routinized stations. These pursuits often included extensive reading of any and all available materials, the Bible and other religious texts, practical professional manuals, and any other books, newspapers, or periodicals that were either part of a small station library or personally owned and delivered by the infrequent supply tenders. Writing letters to family and friends, and the keeping of detailed personal journals were also common and vital activities. Many keepers engaged in various practical and often intricate crafts, such as detailed ship modeling, often inside bottles, the patient mending of fishing nets or service ropes, or fine wood carving. Some played musical instruments if they possessed one and had the talent, and where the station's specific location and conditions permitted. Many keepers engaged in fishing from the rocks or a small station boat, or diligently tended small, often surprisingly productive, vegetable gardens to supplement their monotonous official diet. Many keepers were, by necessity and by inclination, remarkably skilled with their hands, a faculty essential for their constant repair and maintenance duties around the lighthouse. This practical dexterity often translated into creative and absorbing hobbies during their leisure hours. As mentioned, building incredibly intricate and wonderfully detailed ship models inside narrow-necked glass bottles was a classic lighthouse keeper pastime, a true testament to extraordinary patience. Exceptionally steady hands and the ability to work with minute precision in often cramped conditions. Wood carving, perhaps using pieces of driftwood poetically washed ashore after a storm, or utilizing small pieces of timber supplied for repairs, could produce charming, naive figures of seabirds or sailors. Useful small objects like boxes or tool handles, or simply intricately whittled curiosities that help to pass the long, quiet hours. Practical crafts like meticulously mending their own heavy oilskins and woolen clothes, carefully repairing fishing nets if they use them, or expertly splicing and resplicing ropes used for hoisting supplies or securing the station boat, were both necessary for survival and a good way to keep hands busy and minds constructively occupied. If you were a particularly artistic and perhaps even slightly entrepreneurial keeper, your little lighthouse-based Etsy shop, had such a thing existed in the 19th century, would have been incredibly niche and highly specialized. Just listed hand-carved seagull figurine, Nomo 37, featuring a slightly judgmental and world-weary facial expression, complete with authentic salt spray weathering and a faint, lingering aroma of lamp oil. Free shipping worldwide on the very slim chance that you can arrange for your own private supply tender to collect it from this godforsaken rock. For some fortunate keepers, a musical instrument, perhaps a simple, sweet-toned wooden flute, a soulful, melancholic concertina, a lively foot-tapping fiddle, or a mournful, pocket-sized harmonica, was an absolutely indispensable companion, a source of profound comfort and personal expression. In the vast, echoing silence of the isolated tower, or competing with the roar of the wind outside. Music could be a powerful solace, a way to articulate emotions that mere words couldn't adequately capture, a direct link to cherished memories of home, hearth, and happier, more sociable times. One can easily imagine the haunting, lonely sound of a single flute melody, or a few sad sea shanties, drifting out over the dark, restless waves on a calm, moonlit night, a poignant tune perhaps only heard by the silently circling gulls, the distant, unblinking stars, and the keeper himself. Of course, if you were unlucky enough to have assistant keepers also living and sleeping within the confined, resonant space of the tower, your particular musical talents, or perhaps more problematically, your distinct lack thereof, might be subject to some rather direct, unvarnished, and possibly quite critical peer review, especially if your enthusiastic but off-key fiddle playing regularly coincided with their precious off-watch sleeping hours. For those keepers fortunate enough to be stationed on mainland lighthouses or on larger, more stable coastal islands where a small patch of cultivable soil could be found, painstakingly cleared, and perhaps somewhat protected from the worst of the salt spray and wind, gardening often became a vital, rewarding, and deeply grounding activity. It was invariably an immense challenge, of course, constantly battling the corrosive, salty air, the fierce, plant-shredding winds, the often poor, thin soil, and frequently a scarcity of fresh water for irrigation. But the sheer, unadulterated joy of being able to grow even a few fresh vegetables, some hardy, resilient potatoes, perhaps some determined onions, a few rows of stoic cabbages, or some surprisingly sweet carrots, was a truly priceless addition to the often monotonous and overly salted official diet of preserved meats and dry, hardtack biscuits. A small, carefully tended garden, perhaps sheltered by a low, painstakingly constructed stone wall, or lovingly nurtured within a makeshift cold frame crafted from old window panes and driftwood, was not just a practical source of much-needed fresh food. It was a vital connection to the living earth, a welcome splash of vibrant green in a world often overwhelmingly dominated by gray stone, gray sea, and gray sky. It was a deeply satisfying, hopeful act of creation and patient nurturing in an environment often characterized by harshness and decay. Fishing from the rocks at the base of the tower, or from a small, sturdy station boat if one was provided by the service and the often treacherous seas were calm enough to permit its safe use, was another common and practical way for keepers to both supplement their diet with fresh protein and to engage in a focused, absorbing activity that helped to pass the time. The quiet thrill of a bite, the skilled struggle of the catch, and the welcome prospect of fresh, grilled fish for supper would have been a significant and eagerly anticipated break from the usual fare. Collecting edible shellfish like mussels, limpets, or winkles from the intertidal zone at low tide, or even carefully foraging for certain types of edible seaweeds or coastal plants, could also occasionally add some much-needed variety and nutrients to the keeper's meager table. For a quirky tidbit related to these solitary pursuits, some particularly patient and dexterous lighthouse keepers became quite renowned, at least within the small circle of the lighthouse service or among local maritime communities, for their truly exquisite and incredibly detailed ship models. These were often meticulously built inside very narrow-necked glass bottles, a highly specialized and famously challenging craft. This pastime required immense, almost superhuman patience, exceptionally steady hands, keen eyesight, and a collection of ingenious, often homemade, long-handled tools for manipulating the tiny, pre-carved pieces within the bottle's confines. These tiny, perfect maritime worlds, miraculously encased in glass, were a testament to the keeper's long hours of solitary focus. And these intricate creations sometimes became prized collector's items, eagerly sought after by those on the mainland who marveled at the incredible skill and dedication involved in their construction. And then, of course, there was simply the unending, free, and ever-changing spectacle of nature itself. Many lighthouse keepers, by virtue of their unique, isolated, and often elevated vantage points, became keen amateur naturalists by default. Their remote stations offered unparalleled and often undisturbed opportunities to witness dramatic seasonal bird migrations, the complex nesting behaviors of seabirds, the playful or majestic passage of seals, dolphins, porpoises, or even whales, the diverse forms of fish and invertebrate life visible in the clear surrounding waters, and the subtle daily shifts in complex weather patterns, cloud formations, and oceanic conditions. Some keepers took to keeping detailed personal notes and sketches of these fascinating observations, occasionally contributing valuable original information to the wider scientific knowledge of the time. Their isolated towers becoming unintentional, but nonetheless useful, outposts of natural history. Now, the true extent to which the various national lighthouse authorities in the 19th century actively and consistently encouraged or formally provided specific resources and support for their keepers' leisure activities, their ongoing mental stimulation, and their overall psychological well-being, beyond supplying the absolute basic necessities for physical survival and the extremely detailed official manuals outlining their rigorous operational duties. And furthermore, how significantly this level of official support, or more often perhaps benign neglect, varied between different national lighthouse services, or indeed changed over the course of the decades of the 19th century as societal awareness of mental health and the impact of isolation slowly, if haltingly, began to grow, is an area where formal historical records often provide far more copious insight into the technical and logistical demands of lighthouse keeping than into the detailed personal lives, the specific hobbies, the intellectual pursuits, and the deep emotional needs of the keepers themselves. Were they provided with books and art supplies, or just more lamp oil and tins of salt beef? The official record is often silent on such humane details. And finally, woven throughout all these other activities, there were always the simple, mundane, but utterly essential domestic chores that helped to structure a part of every single day, carefully cooking your solitary meals over a small, often smoky stove, perhaps trying to make the monotonous rations taste a little different each time. Painstakingly washing your few clothes and linens by hand, often in cold, hard water, and then finding a place to dry them in the damp, salty air. Diligently mending torn garments or worn-out oilskins with needle and thread, and generally keeping your small, cramped living space as clean, tidy, and habitable as humanly possible under such challenging and confined conditions. These repetitive, necessary tasks, while perhaps not particularly exciting or intellectually stimulating in themselves, nonetheless provided a comforting, familiar rhythm to daily life. They offered a crucial sense of normalcy, a tangible connection to the ordinary human activities that continued unabated in the bustling, distant world far beyond your lonely, guiding beam. If your main officially recognized hobby on any given day was simply listed in your mental logbook as competitive staring contest with particularly large and unblinking ocean waves, or advanced interpretive dance performed solely for an audience of confused seagulls, then you were probably in exactly the right, if somewhat uniquely challenging and undeniably peculiar, line of work. Other highly transferable skills likely included expert seagull impersonator for light personal entertainment purposes only, and possessor of an encyclopedic knowledge of at least 3 incredibly sad and exceptionally lengthy sea shanties. Memorized by heart, with optional mournful harmonica accompaniment strongly encouraged during periods of dense fog. These solitary pastimes, these small, often unnoticed acts of creation, learning, and determined self-sufficiency were therefore so much more than just simple ways to fill the otherwise empty, echoing hours for the 19th century lighthouse keeper. They were vital lifelines for the mind, the heart, and the spirit. They were essential, self-prescribed defenses against the potentially crushing weight of profound isolation and the insidious erosion of relentless monotony. They were crucial, practical tools for maintaining sanity, preserving a sense of individual identity, and nurturing a resilient sense of human purpose in what was undoubtedly one of the loneliest, most demanding, and most uniquely challenging jobs on the face of the earth, or at least on its watery, windswept edges. Each stitch patiently sewn, each page slowly read, each intricate model ship painstakingly built within its glass prison was a small, quiet, but powerful act of defiance against the vast, indifferent, and often overwhelming emptiness that constantly surrounded the steadfast, lonely, and life-saving shining light. Those quiet, solitary hobbies we've just explored in our sleepy contemplation, those small, patient acts of meticulous creation, of dedicated learning from well-thumbed books, and of resourceful, ingenious self-sufficiency, were in many ways the essential inner ballast, the unseen, vital anchors that helped to keep the 19th century lighthouse keeper's mind steady and their spirit resilient through the long, often lonely, and sometimes profoundly terrifying tides of their unique, isolated vigil. But what specific manner of person, what particular rare combination of inherent temperament, acquired skill, and unshakable moral fiber was truly suited to such an extraordinary, incredibly demanding, and deeply, fundamentally isolated existence? And what, as we prepare to gently extinguish our own little historical beacon for this night, is the enduring, resonant legacy that these stoic, often forgotten, and largely unsung guardians of the light have left behind for us to ponder in our dreams, to thrive, or perhaps more realistically for many, even just to survive and function effectively day after day, year after year. As a lighthouse keeper in the demanding 19th century, you undoubtedly needed a very particular and rather uncommon set of personal qualities. First and foremost, you had to be imbued with an unwavering, almost religious, almost deeply cellular, sense of profound duty and absolute unquestionable reliability. Thousands of unseen, unknown lives out there on the dark and stormy waters literally depended, night after night, on your constant, unblinking vigilance and your meticulous, unwavering adherence to the established routines and procedures. You needed to be incredibly patient, almost supernaturally so, capable of enduring incredibly long stretches of profound monotony, of unchanging, repetitive tasks, without ever succumbing to carelessness, distraction, or the creeping tendrils of despair. Meticulous, almost obsessive. Attention to every tiny detail was absolutely paramount, from ensuring the perfect, smokeless trim of a lamp wick to the precise, accurate recording of barometric pressure in the official logbook. You had to be remarkably self-sufficient and endlessly resourceful. able to intelligently diagnose and often ingeniously repair complex mechanical machinery or structural damage with only a limited set of tools and no immediate access to expert backup or spare parts. You had to be able to make do with what you had, to improvise solutions, and to face any unexpected emergency. A sudden lamp failure, a breached seawall, a personal injury with a calm, clear, and rational head. Courage. Both sheer physical bravery in the face of terrifying, life-threatening storms that could shake your very tower to its foundations, and perhaps even more importantly, deep mental and emotional courage in the daily, unending battle against prolonged, profound solitude and the potential for crushing loneliness was utterly indispensable. And of course, you had to possess an extraordinary, almost monk-like ability to endure, and perhaps even, in some rare cases, to find a certain quiet, contemplative contentment in that profound, extended, and often absolute isolation from the rest of human society. This certainly wasn't a job you typically apply for if your primary life skills, as listed on your imaginary 19th century resume, were advanced procrastination techniques. Easily distracted by shiny objects or passing seagulls, or requires constant external validation, a lively social media feed, and at least 3 coffee breaks with witty colleagues per hour. Or in this specific, very windy case, if your main hobby was being easily distracted by particularly interesting cloud formations or unusually shaped, mesmerizing waves when you were actually supposed to be diligently polishing the great lens for the 10th time that week. While we often conjure the image of the lighthouse keeper as a solitary male figure, and many indeed were, especially on the most isolated rock stations, it's also important and rather heartwarming to remember that some lighthouse stations, particularly those more substantial ones located on the mainland or on larger, more accessible offshore islands, which had more extensive living quarters, could and did accommodate families. In these somewhat less lonely, though still very isolated, circumstances, the keeper's wife often became an unofficial, unpaid, yet absolutely vital and often highly skilled assistant keeper. She would frequently share in many of the demanding daily duties, from the endless cleaning of the lens and lantern room, to meticulously preparing the wicks, to even bravely tending the light herself if her husband was ill, injured, or otherwise temporarily indisposed. Children in these lighthouse families grew up in these remarkably unique, windswept, and often magical environments. Their playground, the wild, untamed seashore, their daily lullabies, the constant sound of the waves and the distant, mournful cry of the foghorn. Their young lives entirely dictated by the immutable, powerful rhythm of the great light their parents tended. It was undoubtedly a unique, often incredibly challenging, and deeply bonding, if sometimes also very lonely and restrictive, form of family life, a world literally and figuratively apart from the bustling towns and settled villages just over the often watery horizon. But this unique, demanding, and often strangely beautiful way of life, this centuries-old tradition of dedicated human hands and ever-watchful human eyes faithfully tending the vital coastal lights, was not, alas, destined to last forever. Throughout the course of the 20th century, a series of remarkable technological advancements, the miracle of reliable electricity finally reaching even remote coastal locations to replace oil lamps, the development of incredibly bright, efficient, and long-lasting automated lighting systems, sophisticated electronic timers and light sensors, effective remote monitoring capabilities via telephone lines or radio signals, and eventually, the advent of robust solar power systems and incredibly durable LED technology gradually, but inexorably, began to render the full-time resident human lighthouse keeper largely obsolete. One by one, often starting with the most remote, the most difficult to staff, and the most expensive to maintain stations. Lighthouses around the entire world were automated, their human guardians no longer deemed essential. The last keepers, often men whose families had served the light for generations, sadly packed their few personal belongings, meticulously polish the great lens one final poignant time, ceremoniously extinguish their familiar lamp for the very last time in their long careers, and quietly, with heavy hearts, departed from their lonely, beloved towers, thereby closing a remarkable centuries-long chapter in human maritime history. It was undoubtedly progress in terms of efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and often even improved reliability in some ways, but it also marked the poignant, irreversible end of a unique, incredibly demanding, and often profoundly heroic way of life, and the loss of a certain irreplaceable human connection to and intuitive understanding of those vital beacons of safety that had guided so many. When the first fully automated, unblinking electric light was successfully switched on at a newly demanned station, you can just bet there was at least one grizzled, retired old wickie somewhere nearby, perhaps watching from the shore with a telescope, muttering sadly into his cup of tea. No soul. That electric contraption. Cold as a fish, and I'll wager it doesn't even know how to make a decent cup of proper tea during a force 9 gale, or tell a good salty story to the ever-present, ever-watchful seagulls. It is a mainstream historical fact that lighthouse keepers of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the period often considered the golden age of manned lighthouses, needed to possess a rare and quite unique combination of essential personal and professional qualities. These invariably included an unwavering, almost obsessive, meticulous attention to every minute detail in all their diverse tasks, absolute unquestionable reliability and steadfast dependability, often under conditions of extreme pressure and considerable danger, significant practical resourcefulness and well-developed mechanical skills for maintaining complex apparatus, profound resilience and fortitude in the face of extreme, prolonged isolation and often incredibly harsh, unforgiving environmental conditions, and a deep, almost vocational, unshakable sense of duty to their light and to the seafarers who depended upon it. The widespread automation of lighthouses, a technological process that gained significant momentum throughout the 20th century, with continuous advancements in electrical lighting, automated control systems, and remote monitoring technology, eventually and inevitably marked the definitive end of this traditional, intensely human-centered way of maritime life. This transformed lighthouses from vital, constantly manned stations into largely self-sufficient, remotely managed navigational aids. Yet, even though most lighthouses today stand silent and empty of their former human guardians, their powerful lights now shining with automated, impersonal precision, the lighthouse itself, and the archetypal, often romanticized figure of its dedicated keeper, retained an incredibly powerful and enduring symbolism in our collective human imagination and cultural heritage. The lighthouse, standing tall, proud, and steadfast against the raging elemental storm, remains a potent, almost universally understood symbol of hope, unwavering guidance, ultimate safety, steadfastness in the face of adversity, constant, unwavering vigilance, and a clear, unambiguous warning against hidden, unseen dangers. And the keeper, that solitary, often weather-beaten, dedicated figure, but has become an enduring icon of quiet, unassuming heroism, of profound, selfless dedication to duty, of unwavering dependability in a chaotic world, a steadfast, almost mythical guardian figure, patiently and faithfully watching over others in the deepest darkness. This powerful, resonant imagery has been explored countless times in world literature, from Virginia Woolf's evocative and psychologically complex novel To the Lighthouse to much more modern, popular tales of maritime mystery, historical romance, and isolated adventure. It has been captured in art, with renowned painters like Edward Hopper skillfully portraying the stark, melancholic, and often haunting beauty of these isolated structures. And it continues to feature in films, songs, and folklore all around the world. For a quirky tidbit that speaks to this enduring mystique, perhaps as a testament to the deep and lasting impression their solitary, often lifelong, and incredibly demanding vigils left on the popular imagination and the rich folklore of coastal communities, there are many persistent, often lovingly recounted tales from all around the world of lighthouse keepers' ghosts. These spectral guardians are said by some to still faithfully haunt their old, now often automated, demanned, or even entirely decommissioned towers. These ethereal keepers are sometimes reportedly seen by startled visitors or local fishermen, still diligently tending their phantom lights. Their ghostly footsteps heard softly climbing the winding tower stairs on particularly dark and stormy nights. Forever bound by duty to their beloved post and their sacred, eternal trust. Another, perhaps more historically grounded, charming tradition in some national lighthouse services was the formal ceremonial passing of the light, when one keeper officially retired and another formally took over the responsibilities of the station, a symbolic and often quite moving handover of both the physical keys to the tower and the weighty mantle of responsibility and unwavering trust. Today, many of these historic lighthouses no longer actively needed for frontline navigational purposes in our modern age of GPS. Satellite navigation and sophisticated onboard radar systems have been lovingly preserved and repurposed. They stand as important historical landmarks, fascinating maritime museums offering glimpses into a bygone era, unique wildlife observation posts, or even as rather quirky, atmospheric, and often highly sought-after bed and breakfast establishments or holiday rentals, where modern visitors can briefly and usually quite comfortably experience a tiny sanitized taste of that famously isolated life, though usually with far better food, guaranteed central heating, and most importantly, reliable Wi-Fi. There is an undeniable and enduring romantic appeal to these beautiful, often dramatically situated, solitary structures and the idealized notion of the steadfast, contemplative keeper. However, as we have so gently explored throughout our sleepy journey tonight, it's always important for us to remember that alongside the undeniable picturesque beauty of the towers and the noble, inspiring sense of unwavering duty they represent, the day-to-day reality of the 19th century lighthouse keeper's life was very often one of extreme, grinding hardship, relentless, mind-numbing monotony, considerable and ever-present physical danger, and a profound, sometimes almost soul-crushing, inescapable loneliness. We, as modern observers, tend to love the romanticized idea of the lonely, introspective keeper gazing poetically out at a dramatically stormy sea, perhaps penning profound philosophical thoughts in a leather-bound journal. We often conveniently forget, or choose to ignore, the less glamorous, far more mundane parts of their existence. The part where that same keeper is also desperately, freezingly trying to unblock the primitive privy drain with a piece of rusty, bent wire during a howling midwinter blizzard, or battling a persistent and unwelcome infestation of damp-loving rats in the precious oil store. Those slightly less picturesque bits, one imagines, make for somewhat less compelling material for a brooding, atmospheric oil painting or a sweeping, romantic historical novel. Now, the precise extent to which the widely prevalent, often highly romanticized, and frequently heroic popular image of the solitary, dedicated lighthouse keeper in modern culture, literature, and art accurately reflects the diverse, complex, and often far more prosaic lived experiences and varied personal motivations, which could range from a genuine, almost spiritual calling to the light to simply needing a steady, if isolated, government job with a pension of the many thousands of ordinary men and, in some notable and often overlooked historical instances, remarkably brave women who actually performed this incredibly demanding and frequently isolated work day in and day out, versus the degree to which this popular, often sentimentalized image inadvertently obscures or oversimplifies the more routine drudgery. The pressing economic necessities, the often frustrating bureaucratic entanglements, or even the occasional, though rare, documented instances of neglect, incompetence, or personal failings within the lighthouse service itself, is a nuanced and important topic that continues to actively engage and be critically examined by maritime historians, diligent social historians, and curious folklorists alike. The myth versus the everyday reality is always a rich and fascinating field for gentle, sleepy contemplation. And so, we come almost full circle in our journey, back to our initial theme of boring history. Asiaid, those meticulous, repetitive, seemingly mundane, and perhaps to an outsider, almost mind-numbingly boring daily routines that we have so gently and patiently detailed throughout our exploration tonight. The endless, painstaking polishing of glass until it shone, the precise, skilled trimming of wicks to achieve the perfect flame, the laborious, back-breaking hauling of oil up countless winding stairs, the meticulous, unwavering recording of weather data in official logbooks, the constant, unblinking vigilance through the long, silent, and often lonely watches of the night. These very routines, these seemingly small and unremarkable tasks, were the absolute, unshakable bedrock of maritime safety throughout the entire 19th century, and indeed for centuries before and after. It was this profound, unwavering, and often entirely uncelebrated dedication to achieving perfection in a multitude of small, repetitive, and seemingly insignificant daily tasks that saved countless unseen ships from wrecking upon treacherous shores and countless unknown lives from being tragically lost to the hungry, indifferent sea. Every single perfectly polished lens, every evenly burning wick, every accurately logged observation was a vital, indispensable link in a long, strong, and life-saving chain of human diligence. A quiet but powerful testament to the steadfast, unwavering soul of the keeper. The great era of the traditional human lighthouse keeper may have now largely passed into the annals of history, their lonely, iconic towers now mostly automated, silent, or standing as picturesque, empty monuments to a bygone age. But their enduring legacy, that powerful and resonant symbol of unwavering, guiding light in the deepest darkness, of steadfast, reliable duty in the very face of overwhelming adversity, continues to shine on brightly in our collective memory. A quiet, perhaps even boring, but nonetheless profound inspiration in our own, often turbulent, uncertain, and sometimes disorienting modern times. They were, in their own unique, profoundly isolated, and consistently dedicated way, true every day, unsung heroes of the maritime world. Next, and so, keeper of your own quiet space, as our sleepy exploration of the steadfast, solitary vigil of the 19th century lighthouse keeper draws to its gentle, peaceful close, allow the image of that lone, tall tower and its unwavering, brilliant beam to settle softly in your mind. Picture the keeper, perhaps much like yourself now, at the end of a long watch. The world outside hushed and still, a sense of duty done, of peace well earned. The rhythmic sweep of the light, or its steady, reassuring glow, was a constant in a world of ceaseless change. A small, bright point of order and safety in the vast, often chaotic indifference of the natural world. The routines we've lingered over tonight, the polishing, the trimming, the winding, the watching, were more than just tasks. They were a meditation, a discipline, a testament to the profound human capacity for dedication and resilience in the face of isolation and immense responsibility. The keeper's world was small, confined by stone walls and the endless horizon, yet it was also as vast as the sea itself, as infinite as the starry sky he watched each night. He found a universe in the detail of his work, a purpose in the unwavering consistency of his light. As you now prepare to let your own light of consciousness dim for the night, perhaps you can carry with you a small spark of that keeper's steadfastness, that quiet strength found in simple, focused attention, in the gentle rhythm of breath, in the acceptance of solitude not as emptiness, but as a space for reflection, for being. Let the sound of the wind and waves, which were the keeper's constant companions, transform now into the soothing white noise that lulls you into deep, untroubled slumber. May your own inner beacon, the quiet light of your awareness, find its peaceful rest, knowing that all is well, all is calm. There are no more duties for you tonight, only the gentle incoming tide of dreams.